Leonard Taylor was born in the United States in the mid-1960s. He was the son of Jesse, who also had another son identified as Perry Taylor. In the late 1980s, Leonard met a girl named Mia Perry, with whom he became romantically involved. Around this time, Leonard began to accumulate a criminal record. Initially, he was convicted on charges related to narcotics and concealed weapons in San Bernardino County and spent time behind bars, though the length of his sentence remains unclear. In September 1990, a 19-year-old man was fatally attacked following an argument in an apartment complex located in the same county. By then, Leonard, who had been released, was living in that area. Due to his criminal record, he became one of the primary suspects in the case, but managed to avoid any responsibility. As part of his scheme to evade justice, he used a false name, Michael Chambers. The following year, in 1991, Mia became pregnant. The news of his first child did not motivate Leonard to change his ways. During this time, he was arrested by the Drug Enforcement Administration and convicted for transporting and selling narcotics, leading to his incarceration in a federal prison. Since his daughter was born amid these circumstances, he was unable to be present with Mia during the birth. Facing reality, Mia named the baby on her own and prepared to raise her child independently. Soon after, what people thought became true. Leonard's connection seemed less likely with his newborn when, in 1992, he was found guilty of statutory rape and child abuse in San Diego County. While in prison, he disclosed to a local media outlet that he maintained connections with some scammers involved in irregularities related to corporate check frauds. Upon his release, Leonard embarked on a short-lived career in white-collar crime, which quickly returned him to jail, this time in the Missouri State Prison. The San Bernardino police arrested him again in 1999 for failing to register as a sex offender. Shortly after the beginning of the 2000s, Leonard was accused again, this time for intimate coercion against a minor. Aside from his illicit businesses, which required him to travel across the country, he maintained relationships and intimacy with multiple women simultaneously, earning him the nickname CAs, short for Casanova. Another standout trait of his criminal behavior was making and using fake IDs and different names, ending up with almost 20 of them at some unknown time. Leonard married a woman living in California who also had an outstanding arrest warrant for a probation violation. It was during this time, under unspecified circumstances, that Leonard met Angela Rowe. Their first encounter took place in the city of Jennings in St. Louis County, Missouri. Angela was born around 1976. She had previously been in a romantic relationship with a man with whom she had other children, Alexis Conley, Acrea Conley, and Tyrese Conley. Despite being married and also being involved with another woman in Kentucky, Leonard began a relationship with Angela. After a rather brief period, he moved into her house located in the suburbs of St. Louis. Angela's home was well known among the neighbors for the constant joy radiated by her 3 young residents. From then on, Angela's house and her children also became the love nest for the new couple. By the end of 2004, Leonard and Angela had been living together for approximately a year, and according to her family and friends, their cohabitation was not without its challenges and difficulties. On Saturday, November 20th, 2004, a friend called Angela and asked to borrow $50. At that time of year, the traditional holiday season was approaching. Being a mother of 3 children, Christmas was particularly important. Therefore, Angela later took the time to decorate the house with her children, hanging large and striking candy canes at the entrance and placing lights to add to the festivity. That weekend, the kids went to celebrate Thanksgiving early with Tyrone, their father, and his side of the family. Meanwhile, on Sunday, November 21st, Angela did not show up for her weekend shift as a housekeeper, but called to inform she would not be able to come. The following day, a friend called her, and they chatted as usual. The children returned to their mother's house and were seen by some neighbors in the following days. From that weekend in November 2004, several significant events occurred, yet the how and when of the detailed events were something the authorities could never fully reconstruct. However, everything points to an argument between Leonard and Angela, during which she threatened him with a knife. He then overpowered her and shot her. In a turn of events, realizing that the kids had witnessed everything, Leonard took the lives of all 3 children. Afterwards, he turned off the heating and instead turned on the central air conditioning of the house. According to phone records, on November 23, 2004 at 11:24 p.m., Leonard called his brother Perry to ask for money. It is believed that during their conversation, he confessed to what had happened, adding that things had gotten out of control and that it wasn't what he wanted, but it happened. On the same day, Angela's friend called the house phone repeatedly without getting an answer. A few hours later, at 12:05 p.m. on Wednesday, November 24th, she tried again without success. Between that day and the next, Perry told his girlfriend about what Leonard had done. On Thursday, November 25th, while most American households were finalizing details to celebrate Thanksgiving, Perry went to his girlfriend's house. There, his brother contacted him again. After the conversation, Perry told the girl that Leonard was still in Angela's house, waiting for a letter from California. There were 3 more calls in the following hours, one of which was specifically made from the landline of Angela's house. It was during one of these conversations that Perry's girlfriend heard him ask Leonard how he was still there, specifically alluding to the presence of the bodies. What Leonard's response was remains unknown. Then, a plane ticket from St. Louis to California was booked, with the transaction being made from a phone number with a California area code. Early in the morning of Friday, November 26th, Leonard went to his sister-in-law's house so she could take him to the airport. He had plane tickets from St. Louis to Ontario, California, via Phoenix, Arizona. The ticket was in the name of Louis Bradley, an alias that Leonard used and for which he had a Missouri ID that included his photo. He took the opportunity of being at his sister-in-law's house to leave a box that was to be delivered to his brother. Shortly after, according to some witnesses, he was seen disposing of a gun in a sewer near Perry's girlfriend's house, but the weapon was never recovered. On the way to the airport, Leonard told his sister-in-law that this would probably be the last time she would see him alive. Then, to elaborate on this strange notion, he added that some people were trying to kill him and that she should not pay attention to things she might hear about him. Cameras recorded Leonard that Friday morning passing through the security area at St. Louis International Airport. He was wearing dark pants, a pink shirt, and a cream-colored hat, carrying 2 black bags. Shortly after, he headed to Gate 16 to catch the 8:10 Southwest Airlines flight to Ontario. Meanwhile, Angela's friend continued calling throughout those days until November 27th, never receiving a response. On the other side of the country, between Saturday and Sunday, Leonard finally met up with his wife. During this time, Angela's absence was noted by her co-workers, but unlike previous occasions, there was no call from her to report anything. Leonard stayed in San Bernardino County for 4 days before driving across the country with a friend. He traveled through Texas, Louisiana, and Georgia, ending up in a house in Kentucky. For the week of November 29th, when classes resumed after the Thanksgiving holiday, the absence of Angela's kids at school did not go unnoticed. Then, with considerable concern over Angela's prolonged silence, her family asked the police to check on the woman and her 3 children. Thus, on December 3, 2004, Police officers were sent to the small brick house in the suburbs of St. Louis. Once on site, the officers found several significant details, including that the front door was locked, newspapers were piled up in the front yard, and mail overflowed the mailbox. The team managed to enter through a bedroom window. The air conditioning was running at full power outside while the television was on. The next thing the agents had to face was far from an idyllic home scene. Wrapped in blankets, Angela was found lifeless, likely from gunshot wounds. Her 3 young children also appeared to have suffered fatal gunshot wounds, and their bodies were aligned on a bed in the early stages of decomposition. The coroner found out that the victims had passed away 2 or 3 days before their bodies got stiff. Meanwhile, during subsequent thorough investigations at the residence, investigators found 2 non-functional cell phones, and there was no evidence that Angela had any other cell phone in use besides her own. As often happens in such cases, Leonard was immediately considered the main suspect. This was initially due to his relationship with Angela, but it is fair to say that his extensive criminal history also raised suspicions. As the police tracked his whereabouts, Perry was interrogated about the accusations against his brother on December 8, 2004. During that interview, Perry told detectives that Leonard had called him and admitted to his actions. After an intense nationwide chase, police monitored a house in Madisonville, Kentucky, where Leonard was staying. On December 9th, Leonard tried to flee by hiding on the floor of a vehicle and was arrested on the spot, holding a knife in his hand and moving under the alias of Jason. Beyond that, he made no moves nor uttered any comments. The sunglasses Leonard wore at the time of his arrest, along with a few other belongings, were taken as evidence, although nothing seemed to suggest that these objects could provide any clues. Later, the police made some statements about the arrest. According to the detective in charge, Leonard's wife was not much help in the investigation. Authorities believed Leonard had turned to her for money to facilitate his escape. While the only suspect was finally in custody, the funeral services for Angela and her kids were held in Missouri. Standing beside his oldest daughter's coffin, Tyrone could not help but break down. Leonard maintained his innocence throughout, and indeed, his defense focused on the fact that he was in California when the bodies were discovered. His case was also based on the probable date of death stated by the coroner. However, the suspicions for the 4 deaths were only part of his legal troubles. Thus, while awaiting the resolution of the case, in April 2005, Leonard began serving a 100-year sentence for an unrelated conviction. 5 months later, he filed a request for the state to notify him if there was any intention to use DNA evidence in the case involving Angela and her 3 children, and if so, what type it would be, and whether physical evidence had been presented for analysis or examination. On May 25, 2006, Leonard filed a motion requesting the return of his personal belongings, including the sunglasses he wore when arrested. But in August 2006, the state took possession of the glasses and other evidence that were in police custody, and 3 months later, in November, all items were taken to the forensic lab for analysis. There, experts conducted a specialized test, which is used to determine the possible presence of blood. The procedure yielded a positive result for the presence of blood on the nose pad of the sunglasses, but there was a complication since the sample was very small. For this reason, a second confirmation test to detect the presence of DNA was not performed. Between the end of that year and the beginning of 2007, the stain was subjected to DNA testing, but due to its size, the professional in charge could not obtain a complete genetic profile. What was obtained from the partial genetic profile excluded Angela's children. However, the presence of her DNA could not be ruled out from the study. Specifically, The result had a probability of matching 1 in every 12,300 people belonging to the African American population. In May 2007, Leonard filed a motion to exclude the results of these tests as evidence in the trial. A hearing was held where the state explained that the reports were disclosed as soon as they were received, and that, contrary to what Leonard suggested, the evidence was not deliberately hidden. Ultimately, the trial court rejected his request. In January 2008, Leonard again insisted on the same point by filing a new motion to exclude any evidence related to the specialized test. Another hearing took place, and the court overruled Leonard's objection, thus admitting the validity of the results as evidence of the presumed presence of blood. During the trial that year, Leonard objected to the admission of this evidence but again faced a setback when the trial court dismissed his objections. However, the forensic scientist who conducted the tests testified that the test is presumptive because it can also yield a positive reaction to substances like potatoes, rust, bleach, and nickel. He also emphasized that since there was no confirmatory examination, the substance on the glasses was only possibly blood. Leonard did not testify at his trial. However, the coroner did testify, and his testimony marked a significant turn in the case, as he stated that the deaths could have occurred 2 or 3 weeks before the officers visited the house. This detail firmly placed the incident before Leonard's departure to California. He also explained that he had not initially considered the detail that the air conditioning thermostat was set to the maximum cold setting. When the state called Perry as a witness, the case seemed to turn again, especially when asked about his statement during the police interrogation, where he said that Leonard had confessed to the acts. He said he did not remember anything that happened and went even further to claim that his statements to the police had been the result of coercion by the authorities. After hearing from the various witnesses, it was time for the closing arguments. The state, represented by the prosecution, emphasized that the blood sample found on the man's sunglasses was indeed Angela's. In this sense, it was recalled that scientific evidence does not need to be conclusive to be admissible. Indeed, while some states require it to be so, other states have held that presumptive blood tests are admissible as long as they are accurately described, achieving their purpose of being useful to the jury. After deliberating for 4.5 hours, the jury found Leonard Taylor guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 4 counts of armed criminal action. But there is something particular about his sentencing. Although it has not been possible to determine when and how, it seems that during his time in prison, Leonard converted to Islam, even changing his name to Rahim. Thus, during the sentencing hearing, also known as the penalty phase, he prohibited his defense team from presenting witnesses. Instead, he stated he was Muslim and expressed to the judge that Allah, not the court, would determine his fate. The state presented evidence, including Leonard's previous convictions. Testimony was also offered from a victim who was forced by Leonard to have intimacy and 3 members of Angela's family. The jury found 5 aggravating factors for each victim. Among them, mental provocation, which made the acts considered outrageously vile, horrendous, and inhumane, thereby exhibiting cruelty and disdain for the sanctity of all human life. Consequently, Leonard was sentenced to capital punishment. The execution by lethal injection was scheduled for February 7, 2023, at a Missouri prison. The case attracted the attention of several groups dedicated to defending Leonard's innocence and, therefore, demanding a review and commutation of the sentence. However, the man's claims of innocence were rejected time and again. In response to some of the appeals, the Missouri Attorney General's office stated that the case against him was solid. Perry, Leonard's brother, died in 2015. In January 2023, as the execution date loomed, Leonard's attorneys, requested a hearing on their client's claim of innocence. They were supported by a provision in Missouri law which allows a prosecutor to file a motion for a hearing before a judge in case of new evidence of a wrongful conviction. Firstly, Leonard's defense team proposed a theory about an alternative perpetrator. After a drug deal went wrong, Leonard thought he would be targeted for murder, so he quickly left town. However, the traffickers showed up at Angela's house, and failing to find him or the illicit substances they believed were hidden there, they unleashed their fury on her and her 3 young children. Secondly, the defense team obtained statements from Leonard's daughter and from Mia, her mother. Both stated that he was in California at the end of November 2004, and according to the lawyers, he could not have been the perpetrator of the crimes. These documents were subsequently presented to the Conviction Review Unit within the prosecutor's office. The following month, just hours before the execution, St. Louis County prosecutor rejected the request for a hearing before a judge, stating that the facts did not support a credible case of innocence. Concurrently, the governor refused to grant a pardon, and the United States Supreme Court also declined to intervene. Finally, on Tuesday, February 7, 2023, in the evening, everything was arranged to carry out the procedure. In his final statement, Leonard said that Muslims do not die, but live eternally in the hearts of family and friends. Taylor kicked his feet as the 5 grams of pentobarbital were administered, then took 5 or 6 deep breaths before all movement stopped. On Saturday morning, August 19, 2017, Norberta Greywind watched her 22-year-old pregnant daughter, Savannah, struggle to climb the stairs to her 3rd-floor neighbor's apartment. Savannah was 8 months pregnant, and the unusually hot August weather made it difficult for her to walk on her swollen legs. A few hours later, William Hone, the boyfriend of Brooke Cruz, the same neighbor who had invited Savannah over, climbed those same stairs. When he entered the apartment, he found Brooke scrubbing the bathroom, with Savannah's bloody and shredded body lying on the floor and a basin with a baby on top of the toilet lid. Seeing William, Brooke picked up the infant and handed it to him, saying, "This is our baby. This is our family. Please help me." In a shocking twist against any sense of morality, William assisted Brooke in cleaning up the blood, carrying bags of bloody towels and clothes out of the apartment, wrapping Savannah's body in bags secured with duct tape and ropes, and later disposing of the corpse. This heinous crime would soon send shockwaves across the entire nation. Savannah Greywind was born on August 9, 1995, in Belcourt, North Dakota. Her parents, Norberta and Joe Greywind, were Native Americans. She was a member of the Spirit Lake Sioux tribe. Shortly after Savannah's birth, the family moved to Fargo, but they returned to the reservation when she was 9 years old. Growing up in a vibrant, multicultural community, rich with colorful traditions, Savannah was immersed in nature and surrounded by the love of her family, which she valued above all else. This circle also included her grandparents and 3 siblings. Savannah was a horse enthusiast with a caring soul and was known as a committed student with average performance at Warwick Public High School. It was during her studies there that she met Ashton Matheny, who, like her, was a member of the Spirit Lake Sioux tribe. Their romance quickly blossomed, and by 2010, they were certain they had found the love of their lives. Though they dreamed of starting a home together, it was still early. However, Ashton's daily interactions with Savannah gave him a glimpse of her maternal instincts, as she adored children, particularly her nephews, whom she helped raise with great joy. Later, Savannah attended the Lakes Region State College and earned a degree as a certified nursing assistant, which led to employment at a senior care home. When the home was acquired by a large American company, she was transferred to Fargo in January 2016. To keep Savannah company, her entire family moved to Fargo, renting a modest ground-floor apartment. At that time, Ashton lived and worked in Minneapolis, about 270 miles away, making efforts to visit her regularly. During these visits, they discussed saving money to eventually move in together. In the apartment above Savannah's lived the couple Brooke and William. Brooke, born on July 4, 1979, had a troubled past despite growing up in a normal family in Florida. She was always a problematic young woman, and her relationships over the last 2 decades showed she was obsessive, had poorly controlled aggression, and a knack for intimidating people. At 17 in 1995, Brooke gave birth to a daughter from her relationship with Aaron Edwards. After becoming a mother, she worked as a pet store animal technician and a sales representative. However, one day she left the state without explanation, abandoning her husband and daughter. She then led a life on the fringes of the law, ending up imprisoned in Missouri for passing bad checks, and later in Texas for violating parole while working as a waitress in a Chinese restaurant. When her daughter turned 14, Brooke had some virtual conversations with her through a social network, maintaining brief contact, always behind Aaron's back, who hadn't heard from his ex-wife since she left. Throughout those years, Brooke had numerous lovers, which she boasted about until she remarried in 2006, this time to Carl Cruz, a carpenter from Minnesota. The couple had 2 children, and Brooke worked as Carl's administrative assistant. After 3 years, Brooke left for a period, and upon her return, Carl discovered she kept meticulous records and diaries detailing rather peculiar matters. The most shocking entries included detailed accounts of her various lovers and, more disturbingly, comprehensive reports on births and pregnancy terminations. Brooke kept meticulous notes that included a list of items needed to dispose of an unborn child: scissors, knives, tweezers, gloves, and oxytocin to induce contractions or cause a miscarriage. In 2010 and 2011, Brooke visited Australia, and during one of these trips, she suffered a spontaneous miscarriage. Doctors informed her that she could no longer have children. At the end of that year and the beginning of the next, Brooke was arrested for attacking her husband Carl with a knife. After regaining her freedom, she traveled back to Australia using a false identity. In a sworn statement during a custody battle for their 2 children, Carl wrote that she often fled from her problems, citing her trips to Australia as an example. Living life on her terms, Brooke met Andrew Murray, a chef from Katoomba, through a dating app. She quickly moved to the Blue Mountains and married him. However, Andrew soon discovered the countless lies surrounding his new wife, who had concealed her true identity, the fact that she had children and that she had been previously married. Despite her deceit, Andrew fell in love and decided to salvage their relationship. He stood by Brooke's side but soon grew uneasy about her obsession with real-life crimes. Brooke's fixation on criminal psychology and famous criminals became her sole reading material and favorite conversation topic. Initially, Andrew saw it as a peculiar but harmless hobby, but his perspective shifted when she began threatening him. Andrew became alarmed as her behavior grew increasingly aggressive. He suggested she return to the United States to care for her children, but this only worsened the situation. Brooke threatened to report him to the authorities and attempted to terrorize him, making him believe the police were after him. Exhausted by her delusions, Andrew went to the nearest police station, offering to cooperate with the authorities, as he had nothing to hide. The officers informed him there were no charges against him and suggested something was wrong with his wife. Andrew recounted the torment he endured, including threatening texts and immigration documents with false names. 6 months and 10 days passed from Brooke's arrival in Australia until her return to the United States in October 2012. Back in the U.S., Andrew maintained contact with Brooke for 2 weeks, contemplating a move to reconcile their marriage. However, he soon realized it was futile. Concerned by her erratic behavior, he alerted the Fargo police about the potential danger she posed. However, the police seemed indifferent to his warnings. Eventually, Andrew severed ties with Brooke and moved on. Back in the U.S., Brooke engaged in a prolonged custody battle with Carl for their 2 children. Around the same time, in late 2012, she began a relationship with William, a few years younger than her. Details about William's background are sparse, but it is known that he had recently completed a sentence for child neglect and abuse after bringing his son to the hospital in January 2011 with fractures near his right ear. The whirlwind romance led Brooke and William to move into an apartment in the same Fargo building where Savannah's family lived. William, blinded by what he believed to be an unbreakable love, dreamed of building a home and family with Brooke. Although Brooke initially reciprocated William's feelings, she hid her significant difficulties in conceiving. Meanwhile, Brooke faced the frustration of the court granting exclusive custody of her 2 children to her ex-husband Carl, while she only had visitation rights. Brooke made a living through temporary jobs, either in stores or various nursing homes. Over the months, her feelings toward William changed, as reflected in her diary. On December 23, 2014, she was diagnosed with anxiety at a Fargo medical center and was told she had post-traumatic stress disorder. To make matters worse, the following year, Brooke received a medical report about a growth in her gallbladder, darkening her mood even further. By that time, she wrote in her personal notes about a shadow that seemed to be consuming her true personality. Throughout that year and the next 2, their relationship oscillated between routine calm and occasional conflicts. Given the tragic events that later unfolded, investigators believe Brooke was likely seeking a solution to fulfill her desire to be a mother again and to prevent William from leaving her. While Brooke's life seemed to be spiraling into chaos, Savannah and her boyfriend Ashton's relationship appeared increasingly promising. At the beginning of 2017, they received the wonderful news that they were expecting their first child. The family's jubilant reaction to the news only heightened the couple's excitement for their bright future. Ashton doubled his efforts to achieve their long-awaited independence and marriage. In the fall of 2017, the doctor informed them they would have a girl, filling them with joy. Around that time, their upstairs neighbor, with whom Savannah's family had only a courteous relationship, approached the pregnant young woman with an invitation to smoke an illegal substance. Savannah refused and immediately informed her family about the absurd proposal, especially given her advanced pregnancy. From that moment, Norberta and Joe, Savannah's parents, viewed Brooke and her boyfriend William with suspicion. Saturday, August 19, 2017, began like any other day. At 22 and in her 8th month of pregnancy, Savannah looked radiant but understandably tired. She eagerly awaited her baby's due date. Shortly after noon, Brooke called Savannah to her apartment for help with sewing, explaining she needed her to try on a dress. Despite her distrust, Savannah agreed to help. Once inside, Brooke became hostile, accusing Savannah of mistreating her cats. At 1:30 p.m., Ashton sent a message to Savannah, which went unanswered. Suddenly, the 2 women engaged in a physical fight and Savannah fell, hitting her head. The impact left her unconscious, and Brooke took the opportunity to fetch a knife. Using the sharp object, Brooke performed a cesarean section without medical knowledge, driven by her desire to steal the baby. In excruciating pain, Savannah tried to rise and saw in horror as Brooke removed her baby and placed her in a bathtub. Without proper medical attention, Savannah was severely weakened from profuse bleeding, and soon after, her heart stopped. Worried for his daughter and suspicious of the strange neighbor, Joe knocked on Brooke's door but received evasive responses. The details of William's involvement in the crime vary, with investigators debating two scenarios. In the first, William arrived after Savannah's tragic end. In the second, upon discovering the bloody scene, William tied a rope around Savannah's neck to ensure she had no signs of life. According to the reconstruction of events, what is certain is that Brooke showed the newborn to William, declaring they finally had a family. William then cleaned the crime scene, gathering all evidence including shoes and blood-stained towels, and disposed of them far away. The couple discarded Savannah's body in the Red River on the outskirts of Fargo, near the Minnesota border. Meanwhile, Savannah's family, desperate after countless unanswered calls to her phone, reported her disappearance that same Saturday afternoon. Officers arrived at their home at 5 p.m. and, after a brief conversation with Norberta and Joe, learned where Savannah was last seen. They immediately went upstairs and knocked on Brooke and William's door. The initial visit by the police to the apartment revealed nothing suspicious, so they left. However, a few hours later, still with no news of Savannah's whereabouts, the officers returned to Brooke and William's apartment for further questioning. Meanwhile, investigators interviewed Ashton, whose alibi was corroborated the next day. Consequently, on Sunday, August 20th, 2017, the police visited the couple's residence for the third time. Despite Brooke and William sticking to their story and no incriminating evidence being found, the officers left empty-handed once again. Ashton took matters into his own hands, dedicating every moment to informing locals about the case and asking for their help in finding Savannah. During those anguished hours, the soon-to-be father couldn't stop replaying his last conversation with his girlfriend in his mind, hoping to find a logical explanation for her mysterious disappearance. Determined to follow the only viable lead, the timeline of events, the police took William to the station for an interview. He did everything he could to handle the situation. Meanwhile, back home, both he and Brooke had to care for the newborn, which involved buying necessities for feeding and clothing her. They also began informing their acquaintances that they had become parents, news that quickly reached the investigating officers. Suspecting that Savannah might be held captive somewhere, the police started tailing the couple. Finally, on Tuesday, August 22, 2017, the police raided Brooke and William's apartment. After moving the sofa that had been placed against the door to block entry, they found a chaotic scene. On the bed, they discovered a newborn baby, just a few days old, who was immediately taken to the emergency room. Though Brooke refused to answer the police's questions, both she and William were taken to the station. There, William revealed that when he arrived home that Saturday, Brooke was holding the baby and frantically trying to clean up the scene. His disclosures began to unravel the gruesome story. On Thursday, August 24, 2017, Brooke and William were formally arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and providing false information to the police. Fortunately, the baby was in good health. Genetic tests would later provide crucial evidence against those who took Savannah's life. 3 days later, Savannah's lifeless body was found on the banks of the Red River, wrapped in plastic and adhesive tape. The subsequent autopsy revealed she had been a victim of homicidal violence, though it was unclear whether she died from blood loss or airway obstruction. Genetic tests confirmed that the baby was indeed Savannah's. The child was placed under the care of the county social services and later given the name her biological parents had chosen. Ashton shared an adorable photo of himself holding the baby on social media, a moment of overwhelming joy amidst the tragedy. A candlelight vigil in memory of Savannah was held on the evening of Wednesday, September 6, 2017. The following morning, Thursday, September 7, 2017, a funeral service took place at First Assembly Church. The funeral ceremony was open to the public, drawing nearly 1,000 mourners who joined Savannah's family and friends to pay their final respects amidst tears. Native American songs filled the air as Savannah, remembered as a kind and loving girl, was honored. The town's mayor offered words in memory of the late mother. Many attendees wore red shirts symbolizing not only Savannah's loss, but also the countless other Indigenous women who had met similar fates. After the service, a horse-drawn carriage carried Savannah's casket to the cemetery, followed by 10 horses, one of which was riderless. Only Savannah's family attended the burial, placing various items on her coffin according to their tribal beliefs to accompany her on her journey to the afterlife. In later interviews, Ashton shared that he suffered from recurring nightmares following the tragic events. However, the support from friends and the community was overwhelming. One significant gesture was the creation of a fundraising account in his and his baby's names to help cover essential expenses. Granted legal custody of the baby, Ashton focused on her well-being. With the help of Savannah's parents, he spent his days bathing, feeding, and changing the baby, ensuring she had everything she needed. As he later shared with the media, Ashton realized he had become both father and mother. Brooke's trial began in early December 2017 at the Fargo courthouse. At 6 months old, Savannah's baby was seen in her father's arms during the hearings, where Ashton learned in detail the twisted circumstances of Savannah's death. The prosecutor emphasized Savannah's baby took her first breath as her mother took her last, seeking a life sentence without parole for Brooke, whom she called dangerous and heartless. Brooke's attorney requested life with the possibility of parole, arguing that in his 38-year career, he believed everyone could change, pointing to Brooke's acceptance of responsibility. In February 2018, at the sentencing hearing, moments before the judge announced the verdict, Brooke apologized to Savannah's family for the pain she had caused. She acknowledged there was no excuse or way to undo her actions. Ultimately, Brooke was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for the crime against Savannah. William, having accepted a plea deal and cooperated fully with the investigation, avoided charges of conspiracy to commit murder and to take the baby. Instead, he faced lesser charges of conspiracy to kidnap the baby and providing false information to investigators. However, the judge designated William as a particularly dangerous offender due to his prior conviction for child neglect and abuse, increasing his sentencing possibilities from 20 years to life imprisonment. During his sentencing hearing, William expressed deep remorse. However, during the victim impact statement, Savannah's mother expressed that William's supposed remorse was insufficient. She urged the judge to apply the full weight of the law, condemning Williams and his girlfriend's actions as atrocious and twisted. The judge heeded her plea, sentencing 33-year-old William to life imprisonment as a particularly dangerous offender. Despite this, he was given the possibility of parole. William later appealed his status as a particularly dangerous offender, and in August 2019, the North Dakota Supreme Court ruled that the designation was inappropriate. Consequently, a new sentencing was ordered. The second hearing took place on October 7, 2019. Although the judge disagreed with the decision, he aimed to be as severe as possible, sentencing William to 20 years in prison. Beyond the court and complex judicial processes, Savannah's loved ones strove to regain a sense of normalcy, especially because they believed that Savannah's baby deserved a full life, not one overshadowed by grief. For Ashton, every moment with his daughter was particularly precious after surviving such a nightmare. After enduring such a stressful and painful time, Ashton told the press he felt relieved that life for both of them had become much more tranquil and stable. The young father devoted himself to studying business administration at a local community college. Given their financial constraints, Ashton was looking for a better-paying job alongside his obligations. He was very grateful for the support from the fundraising account, using the money to buy a vehicle and renovate their modest home. What was meant to be a joyful family camping trip full of laughter, s'mores, and starry nights turned into an unimaginable nightmare for the Schmidt family. In the early hours of July 22, 2022, an unknown assailant brutally murdered 3 family members while they slept in their tent. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the community, leaving everyone to question who could commit such a heinous crime. In this video, we'll explore the details of this harrowing case and attempt to understand the tragedy that claimed the lives of 3 innocent individuals. This is the chilling story of the Schmidt family. Tyler Schmidt was born on November 13, 1979, in Iowa, USA. He grew up in Cedar Falls, a city known for being home to the University of Northern Iowa. From a young age, Tyler joined the Boy Scouts, where he achieved the esteemed rank of Eagle Scout. This experience ignited his lifelong love for nature and camping. Tyler especially enjoyed the camps organized by the Lutheran Church, which encouraged family gatherings. While he learned to play the trumpet in his free time, his true passion lay in adventure and sports. He participated in cross-country running and was a member of the swim team at Northern Iowa High School in Cedar Falls. Additionally, he enjoyed canoeing, hiking, and snowshoeing. His interest in computing led him to Missouri, where he studied computer science at Truman State University. There, he not only earned his degree but also met Sarah, who would later become his wife. Sarah was born on March 27, 1980, in Kansas City. She spent part of her childhood near St. Louis with her siblings Karen, Jane, and Adam. Sarah shared Tyler's love for outdoor activities, especially bird watching and studying insects. Like Tyler, she was a Girl Scout and received the highest recognition, the Gold Award. She inherited her adventurous spirit from her mother, with whom she went backpacking in Central America. It was no surprise that Tyler knew she was his soulmate upon meeting her. As a student, Sarah excelled not only academically, but also in leading student projects aimed at improving school life. Her positive leadership and inclination earned her the prestigious Truman Scholarship while still at Washington High School in Washington, Missouri. This scholarship led her to Truman State University, where she met Tyler. They fell in love, started dating, and she readily accepted his marriage proposal. Both Tyler's and Sarah's family supported their decision to marry, as it was evident that they were perfect for each other and destined to build a beautiful family together. On Saturday, June 22, 2002, friends and family of Tyler and Sarah began arriving, elegantly dressed, at St. John Lutheran Church, located in Cedar Falls. The guests took their seats as directed by the wedding organizers. Seated at the front were Tyler's parents and Sarah's mother with her siblings. Nearby were Tyler's uncles and cousins. Outside the church, Sarah waited to make her entrance, accompanied by her father, who was ready to walk her down the aisle and give her away to her future husband. That day, Tyler and Sarah, both 22 years old, exchanged vows and promised to stay together until death parted them. Their shared love for nature led them to choose Boundary Waters, a well-known wilderness area on the border between the United States and Canada, specifically between Minnesota and Ontario, as the destination for their 10-day honeymoon. In the first decade of their marriage, Tyler and Sarah focused on achieving economic stability and furthering their professional careers. After earning their bachelor's degrees in Missouri, the couple moved to Lawrence to pursue their respective master's degrees at the University of Kansas, where Sarah eventually worked. As a computer science expert, Tyler worked for a supermarket, a delivery company, and UPS. He also spent 18 years at a company specializing in business-to-business billing and payments. Beyond their professional commitments, the early years of the Schmidts' marriage were filled with adventures. They always found ways to spend time together and explore new natural destinations. They frequently gathered with family or friends to enjoy their shared love of board games. Occasionally, they participated in activities organized by members of the Lutheran Church and, as avid fans of the Kansas Jayhawks, supported the basketball tournaments held at the Allen Fieldhouse. The year 2013 was bittersweet for the couple. On one hand, Sarah's father passed away from a heart attack, a significant loss for his loved ones. On the other hand, after 11 years of marriage, the couple welcomed their first child, Arlo. 3 years later, on September 17, 2015, they experienced the joy of parenthood again with the birth of a beautiful daughter, Lula Schmidt. When Arlo was 6 and Lula was 3, the family moved to Cedar Falls to be closer to Tyler's relatives. Cedar Falls welcomed them warmly, and they soon became active members of the community. Tyler continued working as a software engineer while Sarah started working as an assistant at the city's public library, and the children enrolled in Lincoln Elementary School's preschool. Tyler and Sarah were known for their kindness and willingness to help others, making everyone around them feel important. This commitment earned them the affection of their neighbors and the entire community. The same was true at the library where Sarah worked. Her warmth and friendly demeanor quickly made her well known and appreciated both inside and outside the library. The couple made sure to instill in Arlo and Lula the same passion they had for outdoor activities and nature. In 2021, they began camping with their children, and despite their busy schedules, the children loved these outings so much that the parents made time for them whenever possible. By mid-2022, Sarah was working long hours. Nevertheless, in June, she took a day off to celebrate their 20th wedding anniversary and planned to take another day in July to go on a family vacation. She had to finish a project for the library before July 26th, but was determined not to let it interfere with the family's plans. During the week of July 11th, Sarah mentioned to Caddy, her brother Adam's wife, that she would be camping with the children at Maquoketa Cave State Park, a popular destination for hikers and explorers in Jackson County, Iowa, famous for its 13 impressive caves and stunning natural landscapes. On Thursday, July 21st, the family packed their car and drove roughly 140 miles to reach Maquoketa Caves. Tyler and Sarah, both 42, along with their children Arlo, 9, and Lula, 7, arrived at the campsite before 5 p.m. The camping area was packed, so the Schmidts set up near the park's entrance. A few hours later, around 7 p.m., another family parked about 200 feet from their tent. This was Joe and Cecilia Sherwin and their 23-year-old son, Anthony Sherwin from Nebraska. The Sherwins set up 2 tents, one for the parents and another for their son. They were on their way home after a week-and-a-half camping trip that took them to Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The journey had been enjoyable and had strengthened the bond between Joe, Cecilia, and Anthony. Anthony was always attentive to his parents' needs, and his mother often said he was the best son she could have wished for, kind, sensitive, and an exceptional student. That year, Anthony was working on a computerized system to support a business he claimed was worth millions. He mentioned that part of the profits would be used to help his parents financially. Cecilia knew little about the project because Anthony kept the details of the mysterious business to himself, only mentioning that he sent emails under strict security. As night fell at Maquoketa Caves, the campers settled into their tents. Before dawn on July 22nd, the park's visitors were jolted awake by the sound of gunshots. Just before the commotion, a man dressed in black entered the Schmidt's tent and attacked Tyler and then Sarah. Arlo, who had been asleep, woke up to the sound of his sister Lula's screams. As he turned, he saw blood inside the tent. Terrified, he managed to escape and ran to seek help. As he fled, he heard one last shot. Cecilia and Joe, in the neighboring campsite, rushed out of their tent amid the confusion. Joe searched for his son among the campers, asking if anyone had seen him. Arlo, still frantic, ran until he encountered the Sherwins. He was screaming and asking for help, saying his parents had been shot. Cecilia took his hand and ran with him to the park entrance. Once there, terrified and unsure of what had happened, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. She was worried because her son was sleeping near the tent where the shots had come from and feared he might be among the victims. The Jackson County 911 operator understood when Cecilia reported hearing gunshots, but she struggled to pronounce the park's name, making it hard to convey the location. She also explained she was with a boy claiming his parents had been shot. The call between Cecilia and 911 lasted 23 minutes. While she answered questions, the operator relayed the attack to the police and park rangers. Although the call was briefly disconnected, Cecilia persisted and called back, only to be put on hold while the dispatcher contacted emergency responders. Despite the tension and nervousness in the park, adrenaline helped Cecilia stay calm. After providing details about their exact location, she handed the phone to Arlo. The boy explained to the dispatcher that he was in a tent with his mom, sister, and dad, and when he woke up, he saw someone dressed in black holding a gun. The 911 operator asked the child where his father was, and after a pause, he responded that he thought his father was hurt. Around 6:30 a.m., police officers and paramedics arrived at the scene and headed to the Schmidt's tent. What they found was horrifying. All the occupants of the tent were dead. The beautiful campsite had turned into a crime scene. Law enforcement immediately began searching for the shooter, knowing he could be anywhere. The tactical team quickly evacuated Maquoketa Caves, State Park, and Camp Shalom, a Christian summer camp located about 1.5 miles from the site of the attack. As officials evacuated the visitors, they gathered them outside the park. Once everyone was accounted for, it was confirmed that only one person was missing: Anthony Sherwin. He was not only missing, but also armed. At 11 a.m., police officers conducting an aerial search spotted a man's body. When they reached him, they found he was deceased. It was Anthony. Although investigations were necessary, the police identified him as the suspect in the homicides. They believed he had committed the deadly attack on the Schmidts and then taken his own life. The incident led authorities to close the park, a measure that remained in effect until July 28th. The Iowa Department of Natural Resources expressed its condolences for the incident. Their spokesperson issued a statement saying she and the entire team were devastated by the event, which had shaken the tradition of enjoying the state's natural wonders. But the legacy would continue for the millions of families who recreate in Iowa's parks. When citizens of Cedar Falls heard the news, they were shocked. The atmosphere changed suddenly, as if a gray veil had covered the sky. The reactions of family, friends, acquaintances, and even those who didn't know the victims were filled with pain. Cedar Falls was in mourning. In one of the windows of the Cedar Falls Public Library where Sarah worked, a sign was placed with a message saying that Tyler, Sarah, and Lula had left too soon but would always be in their hearts. The company where Tyler worked as a software engineer issued a statement describing him as a consummate professional and a mentor to his colleagues who were devastated when they heard about the tragedy. They knew of the love Tyler had for his children and his dedication to sharing his knowledge with little Arlo. The mayor of Cedar Falls also expressed his devastation over the loss of 3 beloved community members on his Facebook wall. He knew Sarah well as they had worked together on a tech project. The mayor also urged the residents of Cedar Falls to be generous towards Arlo, the sole survivor of the family, who was safe, and he shared a GoFundMe link for those wishing to donate. Within a few days, the initiative had raised over $276,000. In response to the tragedy, the local authority ordered the closure of the library for the rest of the day out of respect for Sarah's co-workers. The tragedy also elicited reactions from other political leaders. Iowa governor expressed her horror at the attack and sorrow for the unimaginable tragedy. And a U.S. House representative from Iowa tweeted that it was a senseless and horrific crime. Sarah's family was heartbroken. Her sister said she felt her life had been shattered, unable to believe that Sarah would no longer be just a phone call away and that she wouldn't see her niece grow up. Sarah's family traveled from North Dakota, Texas, and Michigan to join the rest of the family for the private funeral service held at Greenwood Cemetery. On August 2nd, a gathering was held to celebrate the lives of Tyler, Sarah, and Lula at the picnic area of Overman Park. More than 200 people attended. Several attendees, including Tyler's aunt and the mayor, spoke at the podium set up for the occasion, sharing their feelings and memories of the deceased. The mayor concluded the speeches by confessing that he had once envisioned Sarah with her heart dedicated to the community, representing Cedar Falls politically in the future. While the loved ones of the Schmidts dealt with their grief and tried to provide comfort and attention to Arlo, authorities continued their investigation into the horrific crime. According to information released by the Iowa Department of Public Safety, based on autopsy findings, Tyler had a gunshot wound and multiple sharp force injuries. His wife Sarah had only sharp force injuries, while their young daughter had been both shot and strangled. In early August 2022, authorities released official information on the case, naming Anthony Sherwin as the person responsible for the Schmidt family's murder. According to the police, the 23-year-old, who had no prior criminal record, was the sole person involved in the incident before taking his own life. The investigation did not reveal any motive for the attack. The assistant director of the Division of Criminal Investigation stated that no connection was established between Anthony and the Schmidt family prior to that fateful day or during their time as neighboring campers. The police department in Nebraska assisted with the investigation. When officers searched the Sherwin family apartment in Nebraska, they found no suicide note or any indication that could explain why Anthony targeted the Schmidt family and himself. His Facebook page was also void of any clues, as it was completely blank. Regarding the weapons used by the attacker, the assistant director of the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation mentioned only one: a hand-assembled firearm which was recovered near Anthony's body. These types of weapons, also known as ghost guns, are built by individuals, often using parts purchased online without any restrictions. Since they lack serial numbers, they are difficult to regulate and trace. Seeking to confirm this information, the Des Moines Register contacted Anthony's parents, who confirmed that their son had built his own weapon using information found online. They explained that he did it as a challenge rather than out of a specific desire to own a gun. They also emphasized that Anthony was very responsible and had never harmed another person or animal. Cecilia asserted that their family had never owned guns and that they had decided to acquire them due to the rising crime rates in Nebraska. She added that, due to their lack of experience, they even took classes to learn how to handle them. The parents explained that they brought the homemade gun on the trip for protection against crime and possibly bear attacks, as they had experienced one night while camping. They also mentioned their intention to dispose of it upon returning home. Anthony's parents set out to prove their son's innocence, convinced that he was a victim of homicide and not the killer. According to Anthony's mother, an independently obtained autopsy report indicated that he had been shot twice, not once as claimed by the police. She suspected that the first shot was meant to incapacitate him, but she could not understand how he managed to shoot himself a second time, challenging the authorities' theory of suicide. Another point they raised was the color of the clothing the attacker was wearing. Cecilia recalled telling the 911 operator that the assailant was dressed in black, which did not match what her son was wearing: green shorts she had given him the day before the tragedy. Additionally, Cecilia and Joe reported that the police did not disclose where Anthony's body was found, or whether the weapon he allegedly used to take his own life was the same one used against the Schmidts. When they specifically asked investigators if a ballistic test had been conducted to confirm matches, they received no answers. All these concerns were outlined in an email Cecilia sent to the media. In the message, she stated that her son had too many reasons to live and she was certain he would not abandon everything in such a manner. They had not seen any signs of him planning such an attack. In her opinion, Anthony was incapable of killing and had no connection to the Schmidt family. According to the grieving mother, the investigators only responded that it was a random murder. Anthony's parents requested the final investigation report to commission an independent review, but claimed they received no response to this request. In January 2023, a media outlet reported that it had requested public records of the case, adhering to Iowa's Open Records Law and the Freedom of Information Act. The request referenced incident reports, investigation documents, crime scene summaries, and autopsy reports. Devin McClone, from the Office of the Iowa Department of Public Safety Commissioner, responded that the requested records were not public and they could only share the immediate facts and circumstances of the case, which were included in the links provided in the press release. A few days later, the media outlet sent an email to the official inquiring whether the weapon Anthony used to take his own life matched the one used in the murders. She did not respond. Unless new evidence surfaces to the contrary, the police maintain that Anthony Sherwin was a random killer who viciously shot, stabbed, and strangled 3 beloved members of a Cedar Falls family. In contrast to Cecilia and Joe, their son, whom they described as a kind and studious individual, is innocent and another murder victim. They vow to continue their efforts to prove his innocence. After his traumatic experience, Arlo, the only survivor of the massacre, was taken in by his family in Cedar Falls, specifically Sarah's brother. In an exclusive interview with a local newspaper, Sarah's brother stated that his nephew had been very brave and was in excellent mental health. The GoFundMe page created after the tragedy continues to receive donations to support Arlo's upbringing and to establish an educational fund for his future. Allie Costell was born in St. Louis, Missouri, but she always dreamed of attending the University of Mississippi. When she finally got this opportunity, she felt like her life had reached its peak. However, things took a dark turn. Investigators noted that no clues or evidence could have alerted Allie's friends before her life was tragically cut short on that fateful July afternoon. Detectives arriving at the crime scene were baffled by how someone could commit such an act against a well-behaved, easygoing student. Their attention quickly turned to their prime suspect, another student with a hidden agenda that no one could have anticipated. Alexandria Costell was born on September 11, 1997, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her long name was quickly shortened to the affectionate nickname Allie, which is what her loved ones always called her. Allie was the daughter of Cindy and Keith Costell, and she had a younger brother named Andrew. From an early age, Allie showed a strong sense of responsibility towards her studies, coupled with her athletic talents. These attributes helped her excel as a standout student at high school. In addition to her academic success, Allie was an active cheerleader, part of the track and field team, the golf team, and a member of the National Honor Society. Her adventurous spirit also led her to volunteer in Peru and Africa, where she taught English to young children. Cindy and Keith were extremely proud of their daughter, as Allie's affection and light touched everyone around her. She loved animals and children, often working as a babysitter to earn some money, and her caring nature made her a favorite among families. Allie also enjoyed dog walking and was an enthusiast of yoga and half-marathon running. Her spiritual nature and constant smile made her approachable to everyone. During this period of her life, she formed a deep bond with Maddie Norris. The two became inseparable, sharing dreams and secrets in a way that felt like they had known each other in previous lives. Their friendship was more like a sisterhood, leading to many shared adventures. After graduating in 2016, Allie enrolled at the University of Mississippi to study business administration. She was thrilled to be part of an institution rich in tradition, history, and football. Her parents witnessed the excitement and joy this new chapter brought to her life. Allie also dreamed of meeting a charming Southern boy with whom she could one day start a family. Despite the distance, her friendship with Maddie remained as strong as ever. It was no surprise to her loved ones that Allie thrived not only academically but also socially. She quickly made new, meaningful friendships, including one with Elizabeth, whom she met at a campus party. They shared several common interests, which solidified their close bond. Among the new people in her life, one stood out as particularly special to Allie, driven by her innocent romantic aspirations. She set her sights on Brandon Thiesfeld, a young man just a year older than her from Fort Worth, Texas. Brandon was the son of Daniel Thiesfeld, a medical professional. Brandon enjoyed an idyllic childhood filled with love and all the comforts any child could wish for. Raised in a good Christian family, he had ample opportunities for outdoor activities like hunting and fishing in the vast Texan landscape. As he grew older, he also shone as a football player at his school. Like Allie, Brandon was a student at the University of Mississippi's business school. They shared mutual acquaintances and even attended some classes together. However, Brandon's temperament was quite different from Allie's. But as the saying goes, opposites attract. According to local records, Brandon was arrested in April 2017 for public intoxication and possessing a fake ID. This wasn't his only brush with the law. He was involved in another incident, though the Oxford Police Department later confirmed that the records of this case were expunged and sealed. Despite these isolated incidents and the generally good conduct Brandon displayed, there was someone who did not find him particularly likable and had reasons for such a perception. Rex Ravita, another student who lived in a dormitory across the hall from Brandon during their freshman year, frequently encountered him. Rex found Brandon's behavior objectionable, considering him a spoiled daddy's boy. According to Rex, Brandon often boasted about his father's wealth and how it could get him out of any trouble, which Rex found particularly annoying. Additionally, Rex had noticed another particularly unpleasant trait in Brandon. He often treated women in a degrading manner. One night when Allie and Brandon crossed paths at a local bar, she felt an immediate attraction. It didn't take long for them to start dating occasionally, though Allie wished they spent more time together. She often brought him along as her date to most of her parties. However, to almost everyone observing their developing relationship, it was clear that Brandon wasn't as enamored with Allie as she was with him. Despite this, Allie seemed blinded by her initial impression and Brandon's good looks, never seeing through the facade. The evident disinterest from Brandon and his flaws, which were apparent to everyone else, went unnoticed by Allie. She was convinced she had found her dream man and envisioned a future with a home and family. As weeks and months passed, their relationship grew complicated. Around their second year in college, driven by her intense feelings, Allie sent Brandon numerous late-night texts while she was out partying, eager to chat with him. Without any explanation, he blocked her number. During this time, Maddie visited Oxford to see her friend and unofficial sister. Naturally, she was excited to meet the new man in Allie's life, but to her surprise, Brandon didn't show up. During that visit, Maddie became concerned about Brandon's clear detachment, despite the affection Allie lavished on him. Despite this, Allie seemed to be doing well in many other areas of her life. By her third year, she had formed a strong friendship with another university student named Morgan. It was around this time that Brandon inexplicably reappeared as if nothing had happened, seeking to reconnect with Allie. Allie interpreted this gesture as a sign of mutual romantic interest and became filled with hope. However, she was the only one who saw it that way. To everyone else, it was strange, knowing that Brandon had no genuine feelings for her. One of the most astonished by the situation was Rex. Upon learning about the supposed romance between Allie and Brandon, he believed that the young Texan was emotionally manipulating her, making her think he loved her, something Rex was sure was false. Deep down, Allie might have been aware of Brandon's lack of affection. This could explain why her closest friends and even her parents knew very little about him. References to Brandon and their relationship were quite vague. Consequently, none of Allie's close ones were aware of the emotional abuse she was experiencing. Allie often found herself in tears over the man she loved. Her roommate at the time occasionally noticed the sadness in Allie's eyes. However, as she mentioned in a later interview, Allie was a girl who radiated pure light and had the ability to appear happy even when she was sad. According to her, Allie's kindness blinded her to others' malice, making her see people as better than they actually were. In April 2019, Allie told Brandon that she was worried she might be pregnant and sent him a picture of a home pregnancy test. The results were inconclusive, but given the gravity of the situation, Allie expressed her desire to discuss it in person. Brandon's immediate response was like a cold shower. He bluntly stated he had no intention of staying with her if she was indeed pregnant. Over the next 3 months, Allie tried to meet with him to talk about it, but Brandon avoided her at all costs. Sometimes he would agree to meet and then cancel at the last minute. Other times, he simply wouldn't show up and offered no explanation afterward. Amid this emotional roller coaster, Allie continued with her life, hoping the situation would improve, and only communicated with Brandon electronically. Unbeknownst to her, Brandon was spending long hours trying to find a solution to what he saw as a major problem. He spent days researching online about medications and clinics for terminating a pregnancy. Unsatisfied with these options, he even considered more extreme scenarios, looking up how to use a weapon and hide a crime. In the midst of the uncertainty about their relationship status, the vacation period arrived. Allie decided not to travel back home to Missouri. Given that she was in her final year and had high academic ambitions, she chose to stay at the university in July to attend a summer course. Additionally, she was teaching fitness classes at the time, which motivated her to sacrifice her break to earn extra money for her expenses. However, Cindy and Keith were not willing to miss the opportunity to be with their daughter. They informed her that they would come to visit. Allie was overjoyed at the news. Once her parents arrived at her apartment, the three of them had the most wonderful days together. Allie and her mother went shopping and chatted endlessly about countless things. There was so much to catch up on that the hours seemed too short. Knowing Allie's love for the sea and the beach, Cindy gifted her several new items, all with a marine theme, to reflect her interest in her home. Allie, in turn, repeatedly asked her mother to cook her favorite dishes. When it was time to say goodbye in mid-July 2019, Allie wished her parents could stay for at least one more day. As Cindy and Keith headed back home, they comforted themselves with the thought that their next reunion was just around the corner and they just needed to be patient. Shortly after, Brandon contacted Allie via text message. Just as he had done previously, disappearing and reappearing months later as if nothing had happened, this time he requested a meeting to discuss the delicate matter in person. On Friday, July 19, 2019, back in St. Louis, Cindy called her daughter to confirm everything was all right. True to her word, Allie went to a bar that night. A while later, surveillance cameras captured her leaving the place, wearing a white shirt and blue shorts, with her head down, seemingly texting. The footage shows her in front of the door, though she doesn't enter the establishment. Afterward, Allie returned home but left again without her roommates hearing. Around midnight, she finally met up with Brandon. The details of what transpired next have been elusive to the authorities. No one knows what was said or the tone of their conversation. It's assumed there were accusations and clarifications, but this remains speculative. What is certain is that Allie and Brandon met face-to-face at a lake, a vast area surrounded by numerous campsites and recreational spaces. Due to its size and characteristics, the Sheriff's Department has long patrolled its various nooks and crannies. During the early hours of Saturday, July 20th, 2019, the moonlight was the only illumination for the patrolling officers. The prevailing darkness was far from romantic. According to police sources, a local resident walking their dog reported hearing gunshots in the early hours of that morning, between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m. The attacker fled the scene. Around 10:30 a.m., a police investigator was on patrol, not expecting to discover the lifeless body of a young woman. The discovery occurred near an abandoned fishing camp, a remote location about 20 miles from the university. Overcoming the initial shock, the police officer was able to gather some general information about the victim. This experience marked a significant turning point in his career. Allie's purse, containing her school ID and driver's license, was found nearby shortly afterward. When the police department was notified, investigators began their efforts to uncover what had happened. They attempted to trace Allie's cell phone but were unsuccessful. Meanwhile, that Saturday, Brandon spent the day with friends, behaving as if it were any other day, showing no apparent signs of distress. They went bowling and chatted normally, with none of his friends noticing anything unusual. At some point between Saturday and Sunday, Brandon wrote a letter to his parents, revealing his anguish over his actions. Though he avoided explicitly mentioning the crime, he confessed to something terrible that would likely result in his imprisonment or death. He was certain that sooner or later, the police would catch him. As investigators delved into Allie's social circle, Brandon emerged as a potential suspect. The team focused their efforts on trying to contact him, but all calls to his cell phone went unanswered. On Saturday afternoon, the police visited Allie's family to deliver the devastating news. The words hung in the air, creating a surreal sense that they were living a nightmare. Overwhelmed with grief, Cindy and Keith had to face an unimaginable reality. Allie's close friend Maddie struggled to make sense of what had happened. Her mind flooded with memories of the time spent with the friend she considered a sister. Meanwhile, the police continued their attempts to reach Brandon. By then, he had left his friend's house and was driving his truck. Allie's cell phone remained missing. The news of the crime shocked the university community and local residents. However, due to the ongoing investigation, the police withheld further details. As a result, it was unclear whether the attacker had killed Allie at the lake or abandoned her there afterward. The same confusion surrounded the murder weapon and the connection between the victim and the perpetrator. This changed when investigators made a crucial discovery. In Allie's room, they found her smartwatch, which turned out to be an invaluable piece of evidence. The smartwatch allowed them to uncover some of the text messages exchanged between Allie and Brandon. Realizing the urgency, the team immediately tried to contact Brandon, who this time answered their call. He apologized for not responding earlier and made excuses to avoid meeting with the officers, but promised to come to the police department first thing on Monday, July 22nd. After hanging up, fully aware of his predicament, Brandon continued to travel as far as possible. On Sunday, July 21st, 2019, he arrived at another friend's house carrying an unusual item, a firearm. He made no effort to hide it and even unloaded it in front of his host. Brandon also brought a six-pack of beer, so they sat down to drink, chat, and watch television. The next morning, he left without attending the scheduled meeting at the police department, thus becoming a fugitive. Detectives obtained an arrest warrant and began tracking Brandon's phone. Having left Mississippi, Brandon's location was soon identified as Memphis, Tennessee. Authorities issued an alert for his truck, which had a distinctive license plate. It didn't take long for the Memphis Fugitive Task Force to get a positive result. About an hour and a half later, the prime suspect, wearing a blood-stained shirt, was apprehended outside a gas station in the southwest part of the state. The operation involved at least 12 officers and 7 police patrols. Inside the vehicle, they found a firearm matching the one used in Allie's murder. Mississippi investigators were promptly notified. They headed north to pick up Brandon. Upon arrival, he found Brandon calm. He read him his rights and then transported the suspect back to Mississippi in custody. Once they reached the station, Brandon recounted his activities during the weekend of the crime, revealing that he had been roaming around Oxford from Friday to Saturday. Beyond that information, Brandon remained steadfast in his right to remain silent, refusing to provide further details to the investigators. He was detained at the county jail, and his family soon hired an attorney to handle his defense. In a statement, Brandon's father insisted that his son was not involved in the incident. He urged everyone to presume Brandon's innocence, confident that the ongoing investigation would reveal what he believed to be the truth. However, He was unprepared for what was to come. The first blow came when a university spokesperson confirmed that Brandon was suspended from the institution. Meanwhile, Allie's autopsy revealed that she was not pregnant at the time of her death, but this information was not shared with the media. Allie's funeral took place on Saturday, July 27, 2019. Friends, family, and community members left flowers and condolence notes. Despite their indescribable grief, they felt fortunate to have known such a vibrant and luminous young woman. In August of that year, Brandon was charged with first-degree murder. If found guilty, he could face the death penalty. His name made headlines. When Rex heard the news, he was initially shocked, but soon, everything seemed to make sense. He recalled all the rude and contemptuous comments Brandon had made about various women. For the prosecutors, the case became a textbook example of ignored warning signs in relationships that can lead to tragic endings. They believed that Allie's death could have been prevented. As the search for evidence continued, investigators discovered the letter Brandon had written during that weekend while searching his apartment. The COVID-19 pandemic delayed the start of the judicial process, requiring extra patience from Allie's friends and family. However, the investigators used this time to continue their work, sifting through hundreds of text messages between Allie and Brandon, a daunting task. Meanwhile, the prosecutors continued to build their case, gradually uncovering the details of an unequal love story. A series of facts, previously unknown to those close to the university student, came to light. When the case was finally presented to a grand jury in mid-2021, the evidence included photographs of the gun and bullet casings, as well as the letter. To the prosecutors, this letter was clearly a confession. However, the defense presented a completely different perspective. As Brandon pleaded not guilty, his lawyer argued that the letter was merely a farewell note, as Brandon had contemplated taking his own life at that time. To support this claim, the defense mentioned that Brandon himself had stated he was holding the gun to his head when he suddenly fainted. It was during this moment that the courtroom learned from Allie's autopsy report that she was not pregnant and had no evidence of ever having been pregnant. The revelation caused an unmistakable shock. The trial proceeded until, unexpectedly, in August 2021, just a week before the sentencing, Brandon chose to admit his responsibility for the crime. He and his legal team reached a plea agreement with the prosecution to avoid the death penalty. Instead, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearing, Brandon addressed Allie's family, apologizing for the immense pain he caused by taking their daughter's life. He acknowledged that his actions had permanently altered the lives of the Costell family and his own. He expressed a desire to turn back time and undo his actions, but knowing that was impossible, he sought forgiveness from God and hoped that one day they might find it in their hearts to forgive him. Following Brandon's statement, the victim impact statement was read aloud in court, delivered by Cindy, Allie's mother. In her letter, she expressed regret for not being able to keep her daughter away from Brandon, whom she described in stark terms as a monstrous, heartless, scheming, ungrateful, sinister, violent, and corrupt individual. Cindy also added that Brandon had every opportunity to do good in the world, but chose to do evil. Because of that choice, he would spend every day of the rest of his life in prison. She reminded everyone that it was an atrocious act he committed against a sweet soul like Allie, and predicted that every time the cell door slammed shut, it would be a reminder of what he did and the life he took. Those who knew Allie hold on to the certainty that the actions of her attacker will never extinguish the sweet light she brought into the world. On the contrary, they know that her spirit will live on through the lives she touched, as Allie always strived to make the world a better place with every step she took.
We are very grateful and relieved that an arrest has been made in connection with Rachel's murder. Rachel was a mother, daughter, sister, and a friend. Rachel's absence from our lives has left many broken hearts and great devastation.
Rachel Peroski was born on June 15, 1994, in Mission, British Columbia, Canada. Details about her early life are scarce, but it's known that she grew up surrounded by the love of her mother and sister. Those who knew Rachel as a child with beautiful green eyes often commented on her infectious laughter, which could brighten anyone's day. Information about her father is limited. It's only known that he was far from exemplary, had multiple relationships, and fathered several children with different women. Rachel was always friendly and well-liked. At one point in her life, she maintained a close relationship with her half-brother on her father's side, Matthew Peroski, who was nearly 10 years older than her. Matthew was born in 1985 when his mother was only 18. His parents separated when he was young, and at 2 years old, he was sent to live with his father and stepmother. When he was 11, he returned to his mother's home, apparently due to conflicts with his stepmother. Matthew claimed that his stepmother physically abused him, hitting him with spoons while his father did nothing to protect him. Feeling unprotected, Matthew eventually moved back with his mother, resulting in almost no further contact with his father. As time went on, Matthew found it increasingly difficult to connect with people. He left his mother's home and moved in with his grandparents, who later divorced. During his youth, he was sexually abused by an older neighbor, a secret he kept to himself. Matthew felt blamed for his grandparents' separation and believed his mother had abandoned him early in his childhood and saw him as a burden when he returned during his teenage years. Additionally, he felt rejected by his father. This combination of negative emotions significantly impacted him. After many years of not communicating with his father, Matthew attempted to reconnect by providing his contact information, but he never heard back. During this period, he maintained a relationship with his stepbrother and lived with him at their grandfather's house for a while after both had left their father's home. However, this arrangement didn't last long, as they were both eventually kicked out of their grandfather's house. Amidst these complex situations, Matthew did not finish high school. However, he managed to attend a diploma program at a university and obtained a securities license. In his early 20s, Matthew's father separated from the stepmother who had abused him during his childhood. Matthew hoped this would improve their relationship, but it did not. In his early 20s, he struggled to overcome the pain and anger from the rejection he experienced from his grandfather and mother, who insisted he needed psychological help, believing his perspective was distorted. However, Matthew resisted seeking professional help. It appears he was diagnosed with depression at the age of 20, but did not take any medication or attend therapy to address it. Instead, he turned to less conventional methods to cope with his pain, leading him to substance abuse. His already erratic behavior worsened due to these habits, resulting in actions he would later regret. Turning back to the life of Rachel, Matthew's half-sister, it is known that her life was also challenging, but she had the unconditional love of her mother and sister. The charming girl fell in love at a young age and became pregnant. She and the baby's father welcomed the child, named Marco, as a blessing, though they did not live together. At 18, Rachel was going through a difficult time, living in a basement suite in Mission and being unemployed. Marco, who was a year old at that time, lived with his father and paternal grandmother since Rachel couldn't provide the quality of life he deserved. However, She remained a loving mother who kept in close contact and visited her son on Fridays and Sundays. In mid-March 2013, Rachel had planned to go shopping with a friend. When Rachel failed to show up, her friend became worried and contacted Brittany, Rachel's sister. Brittany immediately went to the basement apartment Rachel occupied to check on her. Upon arrival, she found no signs of forced entry, but two things were unusual. Rachel's cell phone was left at home, and music was playing. It was out of character for the young mother to leave without her phone or to leave the radio on. The family informed the police about her disappearance, stating that the teenage mother was last seen on March 16, 2013, at her home in Mission. Shortly before her disappearance, Rachel had been active on various social media accounts, posting photos on Instagram and tweeting about incidents in her hometown. She had no history of running away, prompting the police to categorize her disappearance as concerning. Rachel's neighbor recalled seeing her wearing jeans with sparkly decorations on the back pockets and a purple sweater. Rachel was at her house in Mission, smoking and drinking with a man in a baseball cap around midnight on Saturday. The neighbor, who was also outside smoking a cigarette with her husband, didn't notice anything unusual or felt the need to call the police, as it seemed like Rachel was just having a friendly conversation. By 1 a.m., the neighbor looked outside again and saw that the pair had left. The following Sunday, volunteers cleaning up the northeast corner of the highway informed the police they had found clothing matching the description of what Rachel was last seen wearing. However, police investigations determined that the clothing found was not related to Rachel's case. The family was desperate due to her unusual absence. Unfortunately, after days of exhaustive searching by family, friends, and police, Rachel's body was discovered on Tuesday night. Her body was found in a ditch about 30 miles from her home by a passerby who saw it from the road and called the police. Due to the difficult terrain, a search and rescue team was called to retrieve Rachel's body. The detective stated that the initial search effort involved 25 officers but didn't anticipate the case ending in homicide. Sergeant Jennifer Pound of the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team, Canada's largest homicide unit, said in a press conference that although Rachel's murder didn't appear random, the police had no suspects in custody and no definitive motive. However, she clarified that they were not idle and had already interviewed several individuals. Officer Jennifer noted that it was still unclear whether the young woman was killed at the location where her body was found or if she had been dumped there. She added that the social media accounts Rachel frequently used could be crucial in identifying the killer. The results of the autopsy were expected within hours but would not be made public due to the ongoing investigation. Sergeant Jennifer also stated that Rachel's murder had left a void in her family, made even more painful by the fact that she had left behind a small child. She urged anyone with information that could help solve the case to come forward to the police. 2 days after Rachel's body was discovered, over 300 people braved the wind to pay tribute to the young woman at a heartfelt vigil in Heritage Park, Mission. Among the attendees were the father of Rachel's child, who held their baby in his arms, along with other family members, friends, and community members. The atmosphere was filled with sorrow and disbelief, as many of those present had participated in the search for Rachel and never imagined it would end so tragically. Speakers at the vigil remembered Rachel for her positive attitude and sense of humor. Despite the initial outpouring of grief and tributes, time marched on. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Life went on for everyone, while the case seemed to stagnate or be forgotten, at least in the eyes of Rachel's family. What they didn't know was that detectives had been diligently working behind the scenes, relentlessly gathering evidence to bring the perpetrator to justice. The most shocking revelation was the direction the investigation had taken and the closeness of the perpetrator to the victim. On June 23, 2016, there was enough evidence to support charges related to Rachel's murder, and on June 24th, the responsible party was arrested without incident. On June 27, 2016, after 3 years of investigation, the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team announced that they had sufficient evidence to support the charges. The accused turned out to be none other than Rachel's half-brother on her father's side, who was 27 years old at the time of the murder. Matthew, then 31 and residing in Richmond, was charged with second-degree murder, along with a second, particularly heinous charge: desecration of a corpse for having sexual contact with Rachel's dead body and disposing of it. Sergeant Jennifer stated that it was a tragic case that had left a family with many unanswered questions. She clarified that from the beginning, the investigative bodies had worked together to follow the evidence and bring charges. She mentioned that it took 3 solid years of dedication and commitment from all the investigators involved to achieve justice for Rachel. She noted that Matthew had been considered a person of interest from the start of the investigation, but they needed to carefully piece together all the facts to avoid jeopardizing the extensive efforts made. A statement written on behalf of Rachel's family was also read, expressing their gratitude and relief at the arrest of the suspected killer, though the wait for justice continued. The start of the trial was delayed longer than Rachel's family had hoped. It wasn't until 2018 that the case finally went to court. Just as the trial was set to begin, Matthew, her half-brother, pleaded guilty to her murder. Matthew's guilty plea resulted in an automatic life sentence, but a judge during the sentencing hearing had to decide how long he should remain behind bars before being eligible for parole. For second-degree murder, the sentence typically ranges from 10 to 25 years. The Crown's lawyers and the defense attorneys presented a joint recommendation to the court in June 2018, suggesting that Matthew could be eligible for parole after serving 13 years in prison. On July 4th, 2018, as scheduled, the sentencing hearing took place in the British Columbia Supreme Court. Wendy Stephen, representing the Crown, recounted that Matthew was arrested and charged following an operation called Mr. Big, in which an undercover agent posed as the head of a criminal organization. Details of the trial were published online by the Abbotsford News, a community newspaper in Abbotsford, British Columbia. It was revealed that Matthew confessed to Mr. Big that he had killed Rachel, with whom he shared the same father. The confession was recorded with hidden cameras. Wendy, the Crown representative, explained that on the night of the murder, Matthew had gone to Rachel's residence to apologize for abusing her when she was a child. He was 14 or 15 years old at the time of the assault and was found guilty at 19, receiving a sentence of probation, as disclosed in court. Wendy also detailed that Rachel had exchanged text messages with a friend, who asked how her conversation with Matthew was going. She replied that it had been a good, emotional conversation, but that she was very tired and hoped he would go home soon. Matthew saw this message and became enraged. The prosecutor continued, highlighting that Matthew confessed in 2016 to the undercover officer that Rachel's text message made it seem like she was the victim, while he felt he had suffered through the accusations and judicial process. To Matthew, the fact that he had sexually abused his sister when she was just a child seemed insignificant. Wendy explained that, in a fit of rage, Matthew hit Rachel on the head, immobilized her, and suffocated her by covering her mouth and nose with his hand. He then transported her body to his residence in Abbotsford, sexually assaulted the corpse, and disposed of it. After committing these crimes, Matthew tried to cover his tracks by sending text messages from Rachel's phone after her death and getting rid of her keys and other personal items. When it was the defense's turn, the defense attorney argued that the murder had been a traumatic event in Matthew's life, leading to panic attacks, sleepless nights, flashbacks, and nightmares, requiring treatment for depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, which he was receiving in prison. He claimed that Matthew had an unstable childhood, shuffling between parents and grandparents, which generated a lot of unresolved anger and frustration. However, she stated that he could improve as he was participating in prison programs that helped him understand his issues. The courtroom was filled with Rachel's family and friends who had to listen to the horrific details recounted by the prosecutor about Rachel's suffering and the defense's argument portraying Matthew as a victim. Wendy then read the victim impact statements aloud, representing Rachel's sister, mother, and the father of her child, detailing the devastating emotional toll her death had taken on the family. On July 4th, 2018, the judge agreed with the joint sentencing recommendation made by the Crown and defense attorneys during the June hearing. He stated before the British Columbia Supreme Court that he believed 13 years was an appropriate time for Matthew to become eligible for parole, based on sentences in similar cases. He emphasized that Matthew would still serve a life sentence, even if granted parole, as he would always be subject to certain conditions. He added that parole was never guaranteed and could be revoked. He described Matthew's actions as repulsive. After the court session, Rachel's sister expressed that her family felt relieved but mostly exhausted by the entire experience. She added that the family was not surprised by Matthew's guilty plea, as they had always suspected him, despite lacking evidence. Responding to Matthew's claims of suffering, Brittany emphasized that Rachel was the only victim and that Matthew could portray himself as a martyr to gain sympathy or pity, but he was not a victim. She stressed the importance of remembering this crucial fact. Perhaps the most poignant evidence of the tragedy's impact was contained in a letter the family provided to Sergeant Jennifer. In it, they expressed that Rachel was a mother, daughter, sister, and friend, and her absence had left many broken hearts and great devastation, as she was missed and remembered every day. They described Rachel as a sweet, strong, and beautiful young woman with her entire life ahead of her, but she would never get the chance to live out her dreams. They highlighted that her senseless murder left behind a child who would never know his mother and would one day need answers to questions no child should have to ask. The family noted they no longer had words to describe their pain or the difficulty of processing everything that had happened, and they requested privacy while expressing gratitude that justice was served, though nothing could ever compensate for the loss of Rachel's young life. Finally, Brittany said the family hoped to use their experience to help others going through similar tragic circumstances. She emphasized that there should be more support in such painful situations. She remarked that no mother should have to close her deceased daughter's bank account or receive mail addressed to her dead daughter in response to some bureaucratic procedure, as it was too difficult to bear. Brittany suggested that it would be very helpful to have someone designated to handle tasks such as making phone calls to various government agencies so that families wouldn't have to repeatedly explain that their loved one had passed away. She announced that, holding on to hope, the family was trying to focus on raising Marco, Rachel's son, who was 6 years old at the time of the sentencing and was as good and smart as his mother.
You smothered her laugh, you crushed her smile, and you left us with the nightmare of the unimaginable.
Ingrid Marie Rounsaville was born on August 2, 1975, in Renton, Washington State. She was the only daughter of Yorga Bass, a devoted mother and her only known direct relative. Ingrid completed her high school education at Canyon del Oro High School in Tucson, Arizona, in 1993. Following graduation, she pursued a nursing degree at a local university and earned her Bachelor of Science in Nursing 4 years later. About 3 years after her graduation, Ingrid returned to Washington where she met Philip Lyne. The couple eventually married, and Ingrid took his surname, becoming Ingrid Lyne for the rest of her life. The joys of motherhood followed her marriage, with the birth of her daughters, Reese, Brooke, and Noelle, each born 2 years apart. Her daughters were consistently her greatest joy and purpose in life. Around 2014, Ingrid's marriage to Philip encountered difficulties, leading to a divorce that was finalized amicably, with both parents sharing custody of their daughters. Despite the separation, Ingrid retained her vibrant, energetic personality. At this time, she was working as a nurse at the Swedish Medical Center, where she was highly regarded by doctors, patients, and fellow staff for her dedication and professional commitment. Her career was undoubtedly the second most important aspect of her life. Her relationship with Philip evolved into a supportive friendship, easing the co-parenting of their daughters. This emotional maturity greatly benefited their children's upbringing. Additionally, the presence of Yorga, Ingrid's mother, was a constant source of support, playing a crucial role in her life and the lives of her granddaughters. 2 years post-divorce, by 2016, Ingrid was well settled. She enjoyed her job, which provided a satisfactory income, and lived with her 3 daughters in Renton, Washington, just a 32-minute drive from her workplace. Socially, she was fortunate to have genuine friendships, which enriched her life further. It could be said that Ingrid was content with her life, and she felt the same. Yet in her early 40s, she found herself longing for a romantic partner, a desire unmet by her social circle. Consequently, she decided to explore online dating. After encountering various men on the app, none seemed suitable for a deeper connection until she finally met someone who caught her interest. John Charlton, born in the late 1970s in Seattle, was the son of Ray and Joanne Charlton, both military personnel with strict expectations regarding the behavior of John and his sister Shannon. They aimed high for their children's futures, providing them with the best education possible and expecting them to help with household chores. However, it soon became clear that John was not living up to his parents' dreams. He harbored resentment towards them and others, a sentiment that followed him throughout his life. John's frustrations often surfaced, especially when he was under the influence of alcohol or drugs, substances to which he frequently turned. His legal troubles began in 1997 with a misdemeanor assault charge in King County, followed by a charge of reckless driving in Washington State the next year. Over time, the relationship between John and his parents deteriorated, reaching a breaking point in 2006 when, exhausted, Ray and Joanne sought a protective order against him. They had tried everything to make living together bearable, but their son's erratic and inexplicable behavior made basic agreements impossible. John's increasingly threatening demeanor led to the protective order request in Thurston County, where Ray stated that his son was verbally abusive and often tried to provoke fights. However, this request for a protective order was later denied. Ray informed the court that his son's problematic substance use stemmed from immense pressure he felt, which he believed was causing significant mental instability. On June 24, 2006, south of Ogden, a woman and her baby were waiting in the back seat of their van while her husband shopped in a bookstore. Suddenly, John appeared, demanded they exit the vehicle, and drove away with it. The police were promptly notified, and the van was spotted on Interstate 15. An officer followed it to a store parking lot in Riverdale, Utah, where John was arrested. According to Utah's police and judicial records, John was charged with aggravated robbery. He agreed to plead guilty to a lesser charge of attempted aggravated robbery and was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. However, he only served about 21 months and was released on June 24, 2008. Just a few months later, John added to his criminal record with a felony robbery conviction in Montana and a misdemeanor assault in Idaho. He spent approximately 3.5 years in prison before being released onto the streets in 2012. From that point on, details about his life became murky. One factor that perhaps made John more dangerous was his physical attractiveness. He was a handsome man with a charismatic personality when he chose to be. With these traits, he began to explore other ways of causing harm through romance and seduction, only to later unleash his anger. One thing was certain: John was not an ordinary person, and neither was his daily life. Around mid-2012, he took a temporary job where he started a relationship with a coworker named. Initially, she was taken in by his charm. However, there were some signs that, although not entirely clear to her, made her cautious. Something about him, something unsettling and mysterious in his demeanor. Trusting her instincts, she decided to end the relationship. By 2013, they had parted ways. After that, there was a string of women in his life, whose identities remained confidential for security reasons. These women were later consulted by authorities regarding John's criminal career and personality traits. In their subsequent statement, the ex-girlfriends revealed details such as aggressive and dangerous behavior, as well as confessions of major crimes he claimed to have committed, the veracity of which authorities were trying to ascertain. Broadly speaking, John lacked stability in both his work and personal life. Essentially a homeless day laborer, he would either sleep on the streets or stay at the homes of ex-girlfriends with whom he maintained casual relationships. Among his friends, John was known as a reserved individual, but alcohol and illicit substances would often transform him into someone nearly unrecognizable. This complex character, whose physical attractiveness often opened doors for him, was the same man Ingrid met through an online dating site. After exchanging messages and finding mutual interest, they agreed to meet in person. Their first date was set for Friday, April 8th. The plan was to watch the Seattle Mariners' opening game and then, if things went well, go out for drinks afterward. On the eve of their date, Ingrid shared her plans with friends and coordinated with Philip so he could look after the girls that evening. On April 8th, John and Ingrid attended the baseball game, which started just after 7 p.m. They enjoyed themselves enough to continue the evening at a local bar. Around 10:35 p.m., Ingrid texted a friend to confirm that everything was going smoothly with her new acquaintance. However, the night took a sinister turn shortly after. It appears that Ingrid brought John back to her home. Instead of the intimacy she had hoped for, she met a tragic end. The seemingly pleasant man she met online revealed his darkest side. He not only took her life, but also dismembered her body using a sharp gardening tool. After cleaning the crime scene, he placed the parts into plastic bags he had found in the kitchen. He then took Ingrid's car keys and drove her vehicle, a 2015 Toyota Highlander, to Seattle, where he disposed of the remains. John likely continued to drink alcohol after disposing of the evidence, as he did not show up at his ex-girlfriend's house later that night or the next morning, even though she had expected him early on Saturday and was surprised by his absence. Meanwhile, that same morning, Philip arrived at his ex-wife's house around 10 a.m. to drop off the girls. Despite repeatedly knocking, He received no response. He then took a closer look around and noticed that Ingrid's vehicle, which was usually parked outside, was missing. This was particularly odd because he knew Ingrid was off work that day, which was why she had made plans to go out the previous night. Ingrid was a devoted mother who always wanted her daughters close by, and she was invariably at home when Phil brought them over. If her romantic evening had gone on longer than expected, they had a trusting enough relationship that she would have told him to keep the girls longer. Concerned by her absence, Phil repeatedly knocked on the door and tried calling her cell phone several times, all attempts unsuccessful. He then decided to contact Ingrid's mother. Shortly after, Jorga arrived with a spare set of keys Ingrid had given her for emergencies. Upon entering the house, they immediately noticed Ingrid's wallet, purse, and cell phone were left behind, but there was no sign of Ingrid herself. She quickly checked the last messages on her daughter's phone and saw messages from John about the date. She then sent a text to John, asking if he knew anything about Ingrid's whereabouts. He replied that they had indeed gone out the previous night but had parted ways after the game because she needed to return home to her daughters. She informed him that a police officer would need to speak with him since he might have been the last person to see her. After that, all communication from John ceased, prompting Ingrid's mother to alert the authorities. A few hours later, while the police began their investigation, a Seattle resident was about to make a horrifying discovery. As he was taking out his recycling, he noticed 3 white kitchen bags at the bottom of another bin, out of place because kitchen waste is organic and does not belong in the recycling. When he went to correct this mistake and picked up the first bag, he was struck by its unusual weight and nearly professional packaging. Seconds later, he was staring in horror at the outline of a face protruding from the bag. Shocked, he called a neighbor to confirm what he was seeing. Both, still in disbelief, contacted emergency services. The police and forensic team arrived within minutes. Inside those 3 bags were human remains, a leg and foot, part of an arm, and a head. Back in Washington, as panic spread among dozens of Ingrid's friends and family, they took to social media to alert the community, the police, and the media about her disappearance. Suspicion quickly fell on the man she had dated last. Meanwhile, John visited his ex-girlfriend's house. Though she noticed he had a swollen lip, he dismissed it as nothing significant. He claimed it was the result of an attempted robbery the night before he went out to a bar. Meanwhile, the Seattle police soon learned that their counterparts in Renton were searching for a missing woman. Coupled with social media posts, this information helped them connect the dots. After comparing the photos shared online with the remains found, they identified them as belonging to the same person. A search warrant was issued for Ingrid's home, where a thorough search revealed an almost empty box of garbage bags, similar to those found in the dumpster. Bloody traces were found in the bathtub drain, and perhaps most damning, a pruning saw with blood, tissue, and bone on its serrated blade was found leaning against the bathroom wall. The examination of Ingrid's computer allowed officers to access her purchase of tickets for the Mariners game. Considering the link she had with Phil, the police initially pursued this lead since an ex-husband might harbor resentments. However, he was quickly ruled out. The car was located in downtown Seattle on the night of April 11, 2016. The police lifted 3 fingerprints from underneath the driver's door handle, where they also found the same type of white garbage bags. Subsequently, the officers interviewed John. His online dating profile indicated he wasn't looking for anything serious, but that was not a crime. At first glance, he seemed like a normal guy. When asked about his residence to ensure they could contact him again if needed, he admitted to not having a fixed place to live. The officers sensed some discomfort when they asked about Ingrid. In his account, he said that after the baseball game, they took a bus, and went to Ingrid's house. He believed there might have been an intimate encounter, but he wasn't sure because he had passed out. He added that she had not wanted to introduce him to her daughters and had later left him downtown. He woke up hours later on a bench in front of a building. Regarding his last interaction with Ingrid, or at least what he remembered of it, John claimed to have sent her a message that morning asking how she had slept. As the investigators delved deeper into his story, they uncovered his peculiar relationship with his ex-girlfriend, but that was not illegal either. John eventually asked for a lawyer. The officers left the room but did not stop the video recording. If everyone already thought he was odd, what happened next confirmed it. The cameras captured John rolling up his sweatshirt to use as a pillow while he took a nap on the floor. The next step involved interviewing John's ex-girlfriend, who reported that he arrived later than expected that Saturday and noted his bruised lip.
Wow, yeah, I need to get up.
However, this was not particularly surprising to the agents, as they had already observed an abrasion on his head and scratches on his chin, chest, and arms. Simultaneously, the analysis confirmed that the fingerprints on Ingrid's car matched John's. Consequently, on Monday, April 11, 2016, John was brought before a judge who set his bail at $5 million, a sum he could not afford, resulting in his detention as the primary suspect in Ingrid's murder. Several of John's former friends and ex-partners came forward to assist the police with the investigation. Additionally, an extensive search for the rest of Ingrid's body commenced, involving the FBI and other regional law enforcement agencies, due to the grisly nature of the crime. John was assigned a public defender who argued that no forensic evidence or expert testimony linked him to the crime. Nevertheless, on Tuesday, April 12th, the judge dismissed these arguments and found probable cause to hold him on a charge of second-degree murder. That evening, hundreds gathered near Ingrid's home for a vigil to honor her memory. Those who knew her highlighted her excellent human qualities, and friends present expressed that the pain of her loss felt like an open wound. They acknowledged that the hardest impact was on her family, particularly her mother and 3 daughters, who were deeply affected by the tragedy. The following day, Wednesday, April 13th, the county coroner's office officially confirmed that the remains were Ingrid's. The preliminary autopsy report listed blunt force trauma as the cause of death, although the exact date of the crime could not be determined. 2 days later, a sanitation worker found more body parts in a different recycling bin. On April 18th, a man received a phone call from a neighbor. Inside his recycling bin, a torso with a pierced navel was discovered. Ingrid had a navel piercing, confirming the remains were hers. As part of gathering evidence for the trial, police returned to Ingrid's house. This time, they dismantled the plumbing and found more blood in the newly exposed drain trap. They also used a chemical called luminol, which glows in the presence of blood traces, confirming that the crime scene had been cleaned. Despite the initial findings in the preliminary autopsy report, further examination of the body by the forensic pathologist revealed more details. Upon closer inspection, small signs of bleeding were found in Ingrid's eyes. Additionally, marks on her neck led to the definitive conclusion that she had been strangled, and subsequently, her body was dismembered in her own home. The toxicology report indicated that Ingrid had no drugs in her system, but her blood alcohol content was 0.74. On October 2, 2017, in a King County courtroom, John pled guilty to first-degree premeditated murder. His guilty plea was part of a plea bargain that resulted in a shortened trial, sparing Ingrid's family and the community from the ordeal of a lengthy and distressing jury trial. However, his plea was not solely an act of mercy to alleviate the victim's family's suffering. It also afforded him certain procedural benefits. The sentencing hearing took place on January 5, 2018. John's parents attended the court in a dual show of support for their son and respect for the grief that Ingrid's family was enduring. During his brief statement in court, John acknowledged that no words could suffice to ease the pain he had caused, admitting the irreversible harm of his actions. The impact statements from Ingrid's family then resonated deeply. Phil condemned John for taking away a vital companion and the mother of their children, lamenting the maternal guidance and cherished family moments that his daughters would now forever miss. He emphasized that due to John's actions, his daughters would never again receive maternal advice. A friend of Ingrid, visibly shaken, spoke to the brutality with which John ended her dear friend's life, labeling him a coward who initially tried to flee and hide. When finally cornered by the police, instead of owning up to his actions, he claimed he was too drunk to remember what he had done. Addressing John, the judge expressed her wish to imprison him for life if it were possible. Instead, she sentenced him to 27 years and 9 months in prison, adhering to the recommendation of the prosecutors as part of the plea deal that facilitated the shortened trial. Ultimately, the sentence handed down was the harshest possible under state sentencing guidelines. A member of John's defense team expressed hope that his guilty plea and the prison sentence might offer some closure and perhaps a measure of peace to Ingrid's loved ones. When the sentencing was reported in the media, there was significant public outcry. Many expressed their dismay, particularly because John could potentially be released by the age of 60. Furthermore, his failure to provide a motive for his actions did not work in his favor. That night, Lise Coleman needed a babysitter to look after her 10-month-old son, Travis. Christine Falling, who had experience in babysitting, offered to take care of the baby at her house. The next morning, the little boy was found dead without any evident signs of aggression or violence. However, the police investigation revealed a much darker truth than anyone could have imagined. On March 12, 1963, Christine Falling was born in Perry, Florida, USA. She was the second daughter of a couple who would be considered very unusual today. Her mother, Anne, was a minor, only 16 years old when she had Christine. The eldest daughter, Carol, was born more than a year earlier when Anne was just 14 or 15 years old. To this already dramatic picture was added the significant age difference with Thomas, her father, who was 65 years old. Throughout history, there have been a few uncommon relationships where a large age difference does not matter, and the marriage is very happy. However, this was not the case with Anne and Thomas. A few months after Christine was born, her mother left the house, leaving her and her sister Carol in the care of their father, who worked as a lumberjack and had little to no parenting skills. However, the young mother did not run away forever. She returned home sometime later and was pregnant again. She had more kids over the next 2 years, naming them Michael and Earl. Although the home had 2 girls and 2 boys, Thomas, the husband, claimed that only one of the 4 children was his. It was evident that the family's conditions were neither normal nor stable. The arguments between the mismatched couple grew increasingly frequent, sometimes turning violent. During periods when Anne disappeared, Thomas would take the 4 children to the forest while he worked. The situation was dire for everyone, especially the children. Adding to their difficulties, Thomas suffered a work-related accident that rendered him unable to continue working. One day, Anne made an extreme decision. She took her 4 children, put them in the car, drove to a shopping center, sat them on a bench, and left, never to return. It is not difficult to imagine that the 4 children ended up in the social care system. circulating through orphanages and related institutions. No further information is found about the two younger brothers, Michael and Earl. The eldest daughter, Carol, seemed to be a normal child, or at least no contrary references are found. But Christine was a different story. Living in adverse conditions since birth, Christine developed mental problems, intellectual deficits, and exhibited aggressive behavior. Caregivers at the orphanage described her as a compulsive liar and thief, someone who broke rules to get attention. Her relationships with other children and people, in general, were terrible. Everything became more complicated when she began to gain weight uncontrollably and suffer from epilepsy. It is easy to imagine that in an orphanage environment, Christine endured more suffering, becoming the target of mockery, comments, and cruel treatment. However, sometime later, both Christine and Carol had a stroke of luck. They were adopted by a couple, the Fallings, who not only gave them their last name, but also a stable home. The Fallings were a couple who longed to have children, but Dolly Falling couldn't get pregnant. Some accounts suggest that the husband knew the girl's family, which is why they decided to adopt both of them. Unfortunately, although their environment changed, Christine's behavior did not. She was problematic. Her vocabulary and way of speaking were not consistent with her age. She had fits of rage, and she continued a habit she had started in the orphanage, tormenting cats in unimaginable ways. Sometimes she would throw them from great heights to see if it was true that they had 9 lives. She quickly discovered it was false but continued her experiments. Another factor that added tension to the situation was Christine's epilepsy. Life in the Falling household began to turn into a nightmare, not just for the seemingly generous couple, but especially for the adopted girls. According to some sources, the father abused both girls, particularly the older one. This was something the couple always denied, though there are records of 2 arrests of the father for abusing Carol. The first case went to trial, but the jury was divided. The second time, the accusation was made by his own wife Dolly, who later withdrew it. Things were so out of control that the pastor of their church intervened and managed to convince the family to remove the girls from their home. Thus, the sisters were sent to a home in Orlando, where a large group of children, aged between 6 and 21, lived after being removed from their homes due to abuse, neglect, or abandonment. Apparently, this place was more pleasant for Christine, but it did not stop her impulsive, deceitful, aggressive, and cruel behavior, nor her epileptic seizures. After some time, frustrated by their inability to achieve the desired behavior from the sisters, particularly Christine, the authorities decided to remove both girls from the institution. Consequently, they were sent back to the Fallings. From this point on, the intimate abuse seemingly stopped, but the physical violence did not. The final straw was a severe beating the father gave Christine for being 10 minutes late coming home. To make matters worse, the next day, he insisted that she go to school in shorts so everyone could see the marks of his justice. She was not only mistreated but also humiliated. Carol, the eldest, who was approaching 15 years old, decided to find a job to establish her independence. Christine, just over 12 years old, supported her. The day after the beating, both girls ran away from the Falling home. With their newfound independence, their world changed, and not for the better. Initially, both sisters went to a friend's house of Carol's. Christine stayed there for a month and a half, but then decided to look for her biological mother in northern Florida. She managed to find her and lived with her for a while. Nearly 2 years later, in 1977, at the age of 14, Christine fell in love with a 20-year-old young man whose name I couldn't confirm, but it was said he was her stepbrother. Shortly after, they got married, but the sudden marriage lasted only 6 weeks, marked by arguments and violent fights. Christine ended up in the hospital twice for injuries sustained during these fights. In one incident, she even threw a heavy outdoor object weighing over 20 pounds at her husband while he slept. The hasty marriage ended even more abruptly. Following this new disaster in her life, Christine, who by then weighed around 200 pounds, began to exhibit new behavior. Over the next 2 years, she visited the emergency room more than 50 times with a long series of strange and varied ailments that doctors couldn't diagnose. She always seemed very nervous, listing symptoms that didn't correspond to any known diseases. In other instances, potential diagnoses were ruled out with medical tests. One time, Christine went to the emergency room claiming a servant had bitten her, but this was proven false. On another occasion, she arrived at the hospital with bleeding from her intimate areas, which turned out to be just her menstruation. Eventually, the doctors reached a possible diagnosis in her case: Munchausen syndrome, a mental disorder in which a person pretends to be ill, creates symptoms, and even inflicts injuries on themselves to attract medical attention, and consequently, the interest of others due to their supposed poor health. Despite all her strange behaviors, significant weight, obvious mental problems, lack of social skills, and unkempt appearance, Christine had a reputation for loving children and being responsible and trustworthy. This led her to earn some money by babysitting for friends and neighbors. At first, everything seemed fine. Her services were appreciated, and as a result, her occasional jobs became more frequent. Things seemed to be finally going well for her. Then came February 25, 1980. On that day, 17-year-old Christine was hired to look after a little girl named Cassidy Johnson. The child was just 2 years old and at a very playful stage of her growth. Her loved ones called her Poncasito and enjoyed her antics. The girl's parents went out to work, collecting worms to sell as fishing bait. But that day, something went terribly wrong. 5 hours after being left alone with Cassidy Johnson, Christine was calling emergency services. She said the little girl had fainted and fallen from her crib. An ambulance was quickly dispatched to take the child to Tallahassee Hospital. The doctors did everything they could to revive Cassidy Johnson, but without success. One of the doctors noticed a strange bump on the child's head. Christine explained that she had lost consciousness and fallen from her crib. Cassidy Johnson was diagnosed with brain inflammation, possibly caused by an infection. Sadly, after being hospitalized for 2 days, she passed away. The Johnsons, the girl's parents, were utterly devastated, and Christine was also deeply saddened. All accounts agree that at least one of the doctors involved in Cassidy Johnson's case had doubts about the cause of the problem. In fact, he suggested that the police be notified of the possibility that there was more to the girl's death than an accident or brain inflammation. At this point in the story, accounts of what happened vary. Some sources claim that the doctor who wanted to notify the authorities was ignored by his colleagues, while others say the police were notified but did not act. It was also said that the doctor wrote a note for the police, but it never reached its destination. Finally, other reports claim that the police did indeed summon the young babysitter. The officers questioned her but found nothing to justify her detention or to warrant a more extensive investigation. What is certain is that the case was never thoroughly investigated, although the autopsy clearly showed that the head injury played a significant role in Cassidy Johnson's death. After the 2-year-old's death, Christine, apparently devastated, decided to move to another city and ended up relocating to Lakeland, Florida. There, she slowly began to work as a babysitter again, demonstrating the same efficiency she had shown in her initial jobs. A year had passed since the death of Cassidy Johnson, and by then, Christine was 18 years old. Some distant relatives asked her to take care of their 4-year-old Jeffrey Davis. Once again, tragedy struck when the boy suddenly stopped breathing for no apparent reason. Christine called emergency services and Jeffrey's parents, but there was nothing they could do. The boy arrived at the hospital already deceased. In this case, as the cause of death was unknown, an autopsy was performed. The doctors concluded that Jeffrey had died from myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle that reduces the heart's ability to pump blood. A virus can cause myocarditis, an adverse reaction to medication, or a general inflammatory condition, which can sometimes lead to sudden death. With this result, no one suspected the babysitter. The parents accepted the doctor's diagnosis of their son's sudden death. Once again, the young caretaker appeared devastated, and this time it wasn't just any death, it was a family member. Just 3 days after Jeffrey's unexpected death, Christine was asked to take care of another child, Joseph Spring, for a few hours. Joseph, a 2-year-old cousin of Jeffrey, needed care while his parents attended Jeffrey's funeral. Incredibly, the tragedy repeated itself. A few hours after leaving Joseph with Christine, the child was dead. Christine claimed she had left the boy sleeping and then heard a scream. When she ran to see what had happened, she found Joseph dead. The health professionals who examined Joseph's body concluded that both Jeffrey and Joseph had died from the same cause, myocarditis caused by an infection. Although no one had concrete evidence or real arguments, rumors began to circulate in the town about the string of coincidences surrounding Christine's babysitting jobs. Even Christine herself started saying that a curse seemed to follow her, bringing death to the children she cared for. The babysitter appeared deeply affected, and everyone knew she had some mental disabilities, but no one really believed she was capable of murdering the children. Consequently, as suddenly as they started, the rumors began to die down. Voices of consolation emerged for young Christine, telling her to calm down and that it was all a series of unfortunate events. Christine gained even more sympathy when she was hospitalized with a viral infection in her digestive system. But this brought a new question. Had she infected the children she was caring for with a virus that proved fatal for them? But very soon, Christine was cleared of the initial suspicions when the doctors found no connection between the virus she had contracted and the one that caused the children's myocarditis. The general conclusion was that bad luck was solely responsible for the deaths. Consequently, Christine was seen almost as a victim. Besides being physically unattractive and mentally underdeveloped, she seemed to be followed by misfortune. Those who knew Christine defended her passionately. They couldn't conceive that she could be responsible for the children's deaths or even capable of harming a child in any way. Additionally, at that time, infant mortality was relatively common in impoverished areas of the cities. After these harsh experiences, Christine decided to move back to her hometown of Perry. On her own initiative, she decided to stop caring for young children. With that decision made, she took the necessary steps to get certified and registered to care for the elderly. Soon, she began working for William Swindle, a 77-year-old man diagnosed with terminal cancer. William lived alone and needed someone to help with household tasks, shopping, cooking, organizing the house, assisting with his needs, and keeping him company. However, the new caregiver didn't even get the chance to prove she could care for the elderly, because on her first day, William passed away. As in so many previous instances, Christine called emergency services, who found the man unconscious on the kitchen floor. He was rushed to the hospital, but he was declared dead upon arrival. Although no autopsy was apparently performed, the cause of death was listed as a massive heart attack. A week later, in the midst of a hot summer, Christine decided to go out with her stepsister Betty Jean Daniels, who was 19 years old. It was July 14th, 1981. Christine accompanied Betty to a vaccination center so that Betty's baby, Jennifer Daniels, could receive her immunizations. On the way home, Betty stopped at a store to buy some diapers and left Christine in the car with the 8-month-old baby. When she returned with her purchases, Christine told her that it seemed the baby had suddenly stopped breathing. Initially, the mother was not alarmed. She said that sometimes babies breathe so softly that it's barely noticeable. But when she checked Jennifer, she realized the baby was indeed not breathing, and her skin had a bluish tint. The distressed mother immediately drove to the nearest emergency room, where the baby was declared dead. It was thought to be a case of sudden infant death syndrome, or a rare reaction to the vaccines received. At this point in the story, part of Christine's life goes unaccounted for. There is a period of about a year during which there is no information about her activities. The next reference takes us to July 2nd, 1982, when Liz Coleman asked Christine to babysit her 10-week-old son, Travis Coleman. It should be noted that other sources claim the baby was 10 months old. Apparently, Travis had been very sick with pneumonia but had recovered. Since he was now perfectly healthy, his parents wanted to go out that night to celebrate the end of that stressful chapter. At that time, Christine was living with her boyfriend, Robert Johnson, in a trailer. She told Mrs. Coleman to bring the baby to her trailer and pick him up the next morning, assuring her she would gladly take care of him for the night. Sadly, as you might imagine, when Liz arrived the next morning to pick up Travis, the baby was dead. Christine appeared shocked and claimed that the last time she saw him alive was at 3 a.m. when she changed his diaper and gave him his prescribed medicine. She said that at that moment, the baby was fine and soon fell asleep again. Authorities were called, and an autopsy was conducted to determine the cause of death. Initially, it was thought to be a new respiratory problem or a relapse of the pneumonia he had suffered. However, during the post-mortem examination, specialists found internal injuries consistent with mechanical asphyxiation. Meanwhile, Christine was interviewed by a local news outlet about Travis's death. She stated that she had experienced the deaths of 5 children, and although she didn't know what was happening, it was enough to scare her. Travis was Christine's last victim. The medical personnel notified the police that the baby's death was intentional. The police immediately arrested Christine, who soon became known as the babysitter killer. Christine was subjected to police interrogations and evaluated by psychiatric specialists. It wasn't long before the 19-year-old confessed. Christine claimed she heard voices in her head telling her, "Kill the baby, which wouldn't stop until she did it. She also gave some personal reasons for committing the murders. Her account was both sad and chilling. Referring to her first victim, Cassidy Johnson, Christine said they had been playing outside, and the girl was very agitated. When it was 8 o'clock and the child wouldn't calm down, she suffocated her until she stopped breathing and turned purple. Her heart had stopped, her pulse was gone, and she wasn't breathing. Christine tried to resuscitate her but couldn't. Regarding the case of Jennifer, Christine explained that the little girl was constantly crying, which drove her crazy, so she put her hands around her neck and squeezed until she stopped. About what happened with Travis, Christine said the baby was sleeping and she just smothered him for no reason. She continued to give gruesome details, telling authorities that she copied the method from something she saw on television, but added her own touches. She described it as an easy and simple method. After adding that she killed them without knowing why, she explained that she would place a blanket over their mouth and nose and press until they stopped moving, ensuring no one could hear them scream. When she learned she could be sentenced to death in the electric chair, Christine pleaded guilty to the 3 described murders. She claimed she had nothing to do with the others. Authorities were confident that the other 3 victims were also killed by her, but by then, it would have been very difficult to prove, so they decided to leave it at that. In late 1982, Christine Falling was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences, with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. 3 years after entering prison, Christine also confessed to the murder of William Swindle, the 77-year-old patient who lived only a few hours after being placed in her care. In prison and over the years, specialists have stated that Christine did not actually hear voices in her head. Behind bars, she returned to her old habit of claiming to suffer from numerous and strange illnesses, frequently visiting the doctor. Officially, Munchausen syndrome was never diagnosed, but when she had her first opportunity to apply for parole in 2007, a mental health specialist said he believed she indeed suffered from the syndrome and consequently posed a danger to the public. No one came forward to speak on Christine's behalf, and her early release was denied. She had another opportunity before the parole board in 2017, but again, her request was denied. According to one source, her case could be reviewed again in 2024, while Christine continues serving her sentence at Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. Before concluding, it's worth noting that besides the children mentioned in this case, there were reportedly 3 others whom Christine may have also tried to kill, but fortunately, she did not succeed. Leading the list is a 3-year-old named Kylie Summerling, who became seriously ill while in Christine's care. The child was diagnosed with meningitis, but thankfully survived. The other 2 were brothers Charles and Jeffrey Hale, aged 3 years and 14 months respectively. Both also became seriously ill while under Christine's care and required hospitalization, though the details were not specified. The Hale brothers were lucky and recovered from their illnesses. Today, working parents who must leave their children in the care of babysitters have tools to monitor what happens in their homes while they're away. Security cameras and even apps that allow real-time viewing of what happens at home are measures available to protect children from potential abuse by caregivers. However, things were very different in the 1980s. In the book Murder in America, someone once asked Christine what she would like to do if granted freedom, and she said she would love to return to babysitting because she claimed to love children to death. Sylvia Venceslavova, known as Sylvie, was a Bulgarian webcam model who had unwittingly become the most significant figure in Grant's life. He encountered Sylvie on Cam Girls, a live-streaming adult website. Grant was captivated by her performances, spending many hours each night watching her. It cost him 90 tokens per minute to view her sessions, and he regularly purchased 5,000 tokens at a cost of $600. Grant quickly began lavishing gifts on Sylvie, sending her clothes and sex toys, treating her as if she were his girlfriend. While Sylvie did not reciprocate his romantic feelings, she did acknowledge his financial generosity. Unbeknownst to Sylvie, however, the funds were not Grant's own. He had been covertly siphoning money from his father and brother. In a mere 3 months, Grant had squandered $200,000 of his family's money on his fixation with Sylvie. Concerned by his spiraling behavior, his family imposed rules to curb his actions, but the consequences of his irrational obsession would soon escalate to unimaginable levels. Margaret Ann and Chad Robert Amato got married in the mid-1980s. Margaret, who was 2 years older than Chad, already had a 3-year-old son named Jason from her previous marriage. Chad didn't mind that Margaret had a son and was eager to treat Jason as his own. In 1988, they had their first child together, a son named Cody, and a year later, on May 20th, 1989, they welcomed another son, Grant. The 3 brothers grew up very close to each other. They rarely heard no as an answer, but knew they had to follow strict family rules, do well in school, help out at home, and behave well to earn privileges. They worked hard to make their parents proud and to be a strong support for them. Both Margaret and Chad had advanced degrees in healthcare. Margaret worked as a senior operational manager at a top private clinic, and Chad, who started as a clinical pharmacist, later moved into software specialization. The family was well off, living in a large house in the suburbs with a stable where they bred racehorses as a hobby. After high school, Jason moved out to attend college and eventually started his own family in another state. He stayed close to his parents and brothers despite the distance. Cody and Grant were especially close, doing many activities together like attending the same school, playing on the same sports teams, and going to the shooting range with their dad on weekends. Their father owned a notable collection of firearms, which he kept secure. Grant, being the youngest, often got extra attention and care, especially since he was a frail and sickly child. He grew up shy and reserved, finding it difficult to make friends outside his family. His brothers were his closest companions, particularly Cody after Jason moved away. Both Cody and Grant attended the University of Central Florida, where they attended nursing school together and then proceeded to pursue further studies to become nurse anesthetists. Cody was at the top of his class, while Grant struggled and barely passed. However, they both secured jobs in their field. Cody was known as a dependable professional, but Grant often made mistakes at work and needed his tasks double-checked. In the summer of 2018, Grant's career faced a major setback when he was caught stealing powerful sedatives from the hospital. These drugs, used rarely and under strict conditions for causing euphoria and hallucinations, led to his arrest after the theft was discovered. During the police interrogation, Grant admitted to taking the drugs, saying he used them on patients who were not adequately medicated in his view. Some suspected that he might have been using or selling the drugs, but there was no conclusive evidence to prove this. Grant was quickly suspended and then terminated from his job. The theft charges he faced were dropped, apparently because his parents stepped in to help. After losing his job, Grant, who was already somewhat of a recluse at 29, retreated even further into isolation. He spent most of his time inside, often on his computer, and his internet activity was primarily focused on adult websites. Grant struggled with social interactions, especially with women, which left him feeling inadequate. To cope, he spent a lot of time chatting with webcam models on various websites, trying to fill the emptiness of his solitary life. Unfortunately, this habit was expensive, and Grant funded it by taking money from his parents and his older brothers. His dependency on adult content and alcohol became an addiction. Despite this, Grant seemed satisfied with this lifestyle, living off his family's resources and contributing nothing in return. On a platform for private online interactions, Grant met Sylvia Venceslava, or Sylvie, a stunning and charismatic woman from Bulgaria. Her confidence and charm drew him in. Sylvie made Grant feel loved, desired, and unique. He began to believe that they had a real connection and that her feelings for him were genuine. Convinced they were in a relationship, Grant was determined to stand out among her admirers. He spent hours and thousands of dollars each day to keep her attention solely on him and lavished her with gifts like expensive lingerie and jewelry, which she wore during their video chats. Eventually, his father had enough and gave him an ultimatum: find a job or leave home and lose financial support. Grant promised to look for work, but he didn't plan to follow through. Instead, he told his parents he wanted to become a video game streamer. His parents, hoping for any positive change, agreed to set up a streaming station for him. However, once he had his privacy, Grant returned to his usual activities, surfing adult-only sites. In August 2018, Cody, Grant's older brother, decided to take a break and travel to Japan for a new experience. He invited Grant and his best friend Jeremy to join him. Cody and Jeremy had saved their own money for the trip, but Grant's part was paid for by their parents. Instead of giving the money directly to Grant, they gave it to Cody, trusting him to handle it responsibly. During the trip, Grant seemed disinterested and detached. He paid little attention to the sights or tours, often glued to his smartphone. He frequently chose to stay in the hotel, using his brother's laptop instead of exploring with the others. One day, while the rest of the group visited a lake near Mount Fuji, Jeremy accidentally left his credit card in their hotel room. Taking advantage of the situation, Grant accessed Jeremy's account and stole thousands of dollars, which he spent on private sessions with his favorite webcam model, Sylvie. Jeremy noticed the theft later, but thought it was a case of fraud. He couldn't figure out who the thief was and continued to investigate after returning home, unaware that Grant was behind it. Desperate to impress Sylvie, Grant lost touch with reality. He made up stories about living alone in a large house, owning a successful business, and having plenty of money to spend on her. He backed these claims with substantial money transfers, ranging from a few $1,000s to as much as $100,000 for her birthday. Grant's extravagant spending eventually caught his parents' attention since he was using their accounts. Initially, he claimed the expenditures were investments in his online streaming project to gain followers, but his parents, Chad and Margaret, soon realized he was lying. A major family argument ensued, leading the family patriarch to demand that Grant leave home. However, his mother and Cody intervened, recognizing Grant's severe internet addiction. The family was shocked to discover that Grant had drained nearly $200,000 from their accounts. A search of his room revealed vials of potent substances, which Grant claimed he used to cope with his struggles. His parents decided to cut off his access to their funds and planned to send him to rehab for drug and internet addiction. Overwhelmed by everything, Grant declared he was done with it all and threatened to end his life. He then fled in his car at high speed. It was later found out that Grant went to his aunt and uncle's house, where he crashed through their fence and hit their garage wall. Understanding the family's distress, his relatives offered him refuge, giving him a place to stay until things calmed down. Grant quickly accepted the offer to stay with his relatives, but the next day he betrayed their kindness by stealing thousands of dollars from their accounts to fund more sessions with Sylvie. When his aunt discovered the theft and informed his parents, they urged her not to involve the police, promising to handle the situation and repay the stolen funds. That very day, Chad went to collect Grant, recognizing the urgent need for intervention. Chad, Margaret, and Cody knew that reasoning with Grant wouldn't work and feared he might commit more thefts if left to his own devices. They gave him a stern choice: either enter a rehab clinic to treat his addictions or face jail time for his thefts. Reluctantly, Grant agreed to the rehabilitation, and he was admitted to the clinic at the end of December 2018. While Grant was in treatment, his parents went through his computer and discovered the depth of his spending. They found Sylvie's profile, the woman who had captivated their son, and uncovered hundreds of videos and messages that Grant had saved, revisiting them frequently. The family contacted Sylvie to explain that Grant was not the successful businessman he had portrayed himself to be, but rather an unemployed man struggling with addictions, and that the money he had sent her was stolen. Sylvie was indifferent to the revelation, viewing her interactions with Grant as just a job, and she expressed no intention of returning the money. On January 5th, 2019, Grant unexpectedly returned home, having left the rehab clinic early due to non-compliance, completing less than a quarter of the program. He tearfully promised to change his life and seek employment, but he also threatened to end his life if forced to return to rehab. His parents decided to give him another chance but set strict conditions: no computer use, a tight daily schedule, and close monitoring of any money he made. They even secured him a part-time job at a local grocery warehouse. For the first few weeks, Grant appeared to adhere to these new rules, leading his parents to hope that he had truly changed. However, on January 24, 2019, everything took a turn when Grant convinced his mother, Margaret, to let him use the laptop briefly to check his email and look for a better job. Trusting her son, Margaret agreed, not realizing the mistake she was making. Grant's first action was to try and contact Sylvie, only to find out that his parents had already revealed the truth about his circumstances to her. Grant viewed his parents' actions as a betrayal, feeling deeply humiliated in front of Sylvie, the only woman he believed he loved. He thought they deserved to pay for their actions. Chad kept most of the family's collection of firearms securely locked in a large safe and trusted no one with the key. However, Grant knew about another handgun kept loaded in his parents' bedroom. It was this weapon he chose to use. We warn you that we are about to show you graphic images of what happened next. His mother was working on the computer in the home office when Grant silently approached her from behind and fatally shot her in the back of the head. The way her body was positioned suggested she had no time to react or understand what was happening. Next, he waited for his father, Chad, who was just returning from work. As Chad walked into the kitchen, he was met by Grant and was shot twice in the chest without a chance to defend himself. With a chilling calm, Grant then concocted an even darker plan. He decided to frame his brother, Cody, who had always supported him and been his closest ally. Cody had since moved out to live with his girlfriend, but Grant lured him back home using his now deceased father's phone. He sent messages pleading with Cody to come home immediately, claiming something terrible had happened. His plan worked as expected. Cody, concerned, left work early and hurried home. As Cody entered the house and reached the bottom of the stairs, Grant shot him. Cody collapsed, mortally wounded but not immediately dead, realizing the grim reality of his situation but unable to alter it. After killing his family, Grant methodically removed his fingerprints from the gun, placed it in Cody's hand to transfer prints, and then left it beside Cody's body to stage the scene as a murder-suicide. Afterwards, Grant calmly packed his belongings, downloaded video files of his interactions with Sylvie, and even messaged her. Once ready, he loaded his car and drove away. On January 25, 2019, a worried man contacted the police in Seminole County, Florida. He was concerned because his friend and co-worker, Cody, a dedicated nurse, had not shown up for his hospital shift, which was completely out of character. Cody had left work slightly early the previous day, hurriedly departing due to urgent family matters, and he even forgot to pick up his paycheck. Cody had not been reachable by phone since then. His girlfriend, who he had recently started living with, mentioned that Cody had gone to his parents' house after a request from his father, but he hadn't come back or made contact. Alarmed by these unusual circumstances, the police were sent to the Amato family's address. The residence, situated in an Orlando suburb, featured a large property complete with a stable and area for walking horses. Cody's car was in the driveway, and lights were visible in various parts of the house, suggesting normalcy at first glance. There was no evidence of forced entry. The doors and windows were secure. When deputies arrived and knocked, there was no response, and calls to the house's landline were also unanswered. The police obtained permission to enter and managed to unlock the back door with a knife to slide the bolt. Inside, a haunting silence filled the house, yet the lit room suggested someone should be there. The scene they discovered was grim. Chad, the the 59-year-old family patriarch was found dead on the kitchen floor, having suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. Near the main entrance, Cody, age 31, was found curled up at the bottom of the staircase, also dead in a large pool of blood. In the home office, Margaret, 61, appeared as though she might be sleeping with her head on her arm by her computer, but the blood splatter on the monitor and the large stain under her head told a tragic story. Next to Cody's body, the police found a pistol, which forensic analysis later showed had Cody's fingerprints. Initially, it seemed like a horrifying family tragedy where Cody might have killed his parents and then himself, especially since there was no sign of a break-in or any missing items. However, a crucial clue pointed otherwise. Smeared blood on the front door indicated it had been locked from the outside by someone leaving the scene, suggesting that the real perpetrator was not among the deceased. The focus quickly shifted to the family's youngest son, 30-year-old Grant, who had been unaccounted for since the evening of the incident. His car, a white Honda, was missing, as were some personal belongings including a laptop from his room, indicating he had likely fled. Grant was immediately declared a person of interest and a search began to locate him. The following day, the police quickly tracked down Grant hiding in a small roadside motel in Orange County. He was arrested without showing surprise, though he appeared disappointed that he was found so quickly. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Grant vehemently denied all charges against him. During his interrogation at the police station, Grant concocted a series of unlikely stories about his father's severe mistreatment towards him, his mother, and his brother. He painted a picture of his father trying to sever his relationship with Sylvie, whom he described as his true and genuine love. When asked about the tragic night of January 24, 2019, Grant's explanations were unclear and inconsistent. He suggested that a violent altercation had erupted between his father and brother. According to Grant, Cody had seized a gun and fatally shot Chad, with their mother Margaret becoming an unintended casualty. Grant maintained that he was not present during the events, claiming he had spent the night in his car after being expelled from the house by his father. He claimed he drove away the next morning, oblivious to the calamity that had occurred. His account was fragmented and lacked credibility, and the evidence increasingly indicated that he was the lone architect of the tragedy.
Your DNA going to be found on his pants?
No,
You sure? Maybe something, a question I'm asking I already know the answer to.
I know, but my DNA shouldn't be on his pants.
Shouldn't? Okay.
Consequently, Grant was arrested and charged as the principal suspect in the triple homicide of his family. Unable to post the $750,000 bond, Grant remained in jail as his trial began on July 15, 2019. The courtroom heard from numerous witnesses, all of whom spoke unfavorably about Grant. These included his elder brother Jason, other relatives, and Cody's friend Jeremy, whom Grant had previously robbed during their trip to Japan. Witnesses characterized Grant as someone deeply troubled by addictions, dishonesty, and theft. A critical piece of evidence highlighted during the trial was a substantial bank transfer from Chad's account to Grant, executed after all other family members had died. To authorize this transfer, it was revealed that Grant had used his deceased father's fingerprint. The prosecution advocated for the death penalty, arguing the severity and premeditation of Grant's crimes, while his defense pleaded that he was mentally ill and needed psychiatric treatment rather than capital punishment. On August 12, 2019, the verdict was delivered. Grant Amato, age 30, was found guilty of first-degree murder in the deaths of 3 family members and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When asked if he felt remorse, Amato responded with, "My family has been blaming me for months for ruining their lives. stealing and not following the rules of the home, so I might as well be blamed for this too.